Astonishing Legends is presented by Mint Mobile.
After years of getting ripped off by big wireless providers, there's finally a better option.
Mint Mobile is the affordable premium wireless service that you buy online.
To get your new phone plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/legends.
Astonishing Legends would like to thank Mint Mobile, Wondrium, Squarespace, our contributors at patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
Every person has a story. Some are scary, some are gory. From the shadows of their past, the question begged, is this life our last? Come and sit with us tonight, perhaps in the dark or by candlelight. Hear the answers to our request for tales, from tarot readings to haunted jails. They raise some questions we must face as we sail through the void of space. Stranger tales might be imagined, but we deem these astonishing legends.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
The tarot is sacred. Chilean-French avant-garde filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Join us tonight for the first of our 3-week-in-a-row series, Your True Halloween Stories, Part 1.
And we're back.
That we are, folks. A couple of quick notes before we get started tonight. The first one is we'd like to acknowledge all of our listeners who were impacted by Hurricanes Ian and Fiona, particularly in Florida, but everywhere. Ian actually made its way up here to me in North Carolina, but by the time it got here, it was mostly just a little wind and a lot of rain.
As usual, we rely on charitynavigator.org to make sure a charity can be trusted, so if you'd like to pick one out to make a donation to help out victims of Ian or Fiona, head to Charity Navigator, and they have some great choices right there on their homepage for ones that you can trust.
And for those of you who missed our special announcement last week in the main feed here, our last Astonishing Junk Drawer show was a celebration of 8 years of Astonishing Legends, and we ran it live on video on YouTube for over 3 hours on Saturday, October 8th.
Woo! Well, it was a lot of fun. 9 amazing guests stopped by during that time, including several podcasters you will no doubt know, and of course, Rich had him too. Even though the Astonishing Junk Drawer is generally a Patreon exclusive show, this one is available to the public at youtube.com/astonishinglegends. So find and subscribe to us there. We'll be doing even more content there in 2023.
And finally, I would like to dedicate tonight's episode to my good friend Brad Stratton, who passed away suddenly at just 55 on September 21st. I worked with Brad for more than 5 years in New York City, where he was an outstanding music producer at the company I was editing TV commercials for. And we had recently reconnected as he had moved into podcasting a few years ago. In fact, we bumped into each other at Podcast Movement in Nashville last year. He was an amazingly talented musician, producer, dad, and just all-around great guy who leaves behind a beautiful family that are no doubt grappling with the pain of his loss. Brad, tonight's show is dedicated to you, sir.
But before we get started, Scott and I wanted to express our tremendous gratitude and appreciation to all the folks who have sent in well over 100 emails detailing their spookiest and most memorable stories. Quite frankly, we were blown away, not only by the chilling details of some of them, but also by the sheer volume of responses we've received and continue to receive. I mean, in the past, when we've done a call for listener stories, we were thankful to maybe get 20 emails or 30, maybe 40 at the most. But this amount was as surprising as it was welcome. It's an embarrassment of terrifying riches. So we're still getting through them all, and I promise we'll read all of them. But please don't feel bad if your story wasn't chosen. There were just too many good ones to even spread out over 3 episodes, and it was gut-wrenching to have to narrow it down to the ones we will record. I also promise we're collecting and logging all of them, and maybe one day we'll plan on doing a side project with them, like maybe for our YouTube channel or something. So they're all safely kept in our very own Archive 81 or Warehouse 13 or that warehouse at the end of Raiders. But more importantly, I wanted to express something to the folks that have very generously taken the time to write out and send us their submission. Even if your story is second or third hand or some passed down family legend, or maybe there wasn't much drama or action, no matter what went on or what it was about, it obviously made enough of an impact on you that you'll likely remember it for the rest of your lives, a status reserved for the most special events that can happen to us. Some folks may never be able to forget the trauma they endured, no matter how much they want to. And some experiencers have had their beliefs and worldviews forever rocked. But no matter the intensity of the tale, merely a curiosity or truly horrifying, all these stories are profound in their own way, even if it's just to the person that bore witness to them. One of the main reasons we started this podcast is because we like hearing these stories and sharing what we can. We value the connection that is made when one is given the benefit of the doubt. This exchange of intimate and personal anecdotes like these within our club of like-minded folks, without judgment or name-calling, without eye-rolling and hubristic debunking, without snickering unless we're laughing with you, given and received with a sense of kind-hearted acceptance and a fellowship of respect. Well, it's one of the best things about this show and one of the best things a community like this can do. So for those that have beheld, you're not alone in knowing there is much more mystery and wonder to this world than most will ever believe or accept.
Wow, that was really well said, man.
Oh, wait, hold on, wait, are you...
No, I'm
Oh,
being serious.
are we
That
on the
was,
mic? Are we still recording?
kind of made me choke up a little bit.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
nice.
It's not an easy thing to do. A lot of these stories that we start off with, it's people telling us like, I've never told this story before, or I'm afraid to tell anybody
Yeah.
outside of our family, or I did tell it to my family and they laugh at me. People think, am I crazy? You're not crazy. If you just experience something like this, it's not out of the realm of possibility, at least to people who know. It becomes a shared thing, and those who have before, or even just ones who give them the benefit of the doubt, as I said, it kind of makes a bond that is special, and no one else who doesn't believe or has experienced yet will ever know what that's like.
I couldn't agree more. Well, let's get down to it then. This first story tonight comes to us from Jeff Wade, a listener in Boise, Idaho. Jeff is a corrections officer, and I'd like to point out, especially for you, Jeff, that yes, we know you work in the prison system, not a jail, as referenced in aforementioned opening poem tonight. But jail rhymed better, so since I'm 9,000 steps below Dr. Seuss, jail it was.
He does not like them, Jeff, he is. No, to all the hardworking corrections folks out there who deliver justice and keep us all safe, thank you. Because it's not just apparently the real world dangerous things that are associated with your job. There's a little extra sometimes that just adds to the weirdness. Well, it's time to get spooky. So, Sarah, let's roll The Haunted Prison.
So we'd like to welcome Jeff Wade to the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeff. Why don't you start off by introducing yourself to our listeners a little bit? Tell them a little bit about yourself and your background, and then maybe let's talk about how you came across Astonishing Legends and what made you decide to send something in to us.
My name is Jeff Wade. I'm from Southern Idaho, the Boise area. I am the co-owner of a company called Ida History. We do some macabre walking tours. We do a lot of cool blog posts about, crazy events that happen in Idaho's history. So we do, basically anything, everything Idaho history. We also do like family histories and research projects for people. Great gifts, by the way. But yeah, I've been listening to Astonishing Legends for 4 or 5 years now. I was listening to Thinking Sideways, those guys.
Sure.
And somehow, I think maybe in their Facebook group, someone had mentioned Astonishing Legends. So I jumped over and tried you guys out and been here ever since.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for sticking with us. It's always nice to hear people have been listening a long time, especially when, I don't look at the negative stuff anymore, but Forrest will check in on that stuff. And then I'll just be like, oh, I'm glad I didn't look at it. But,
I like to go on like Amazon and read like the reviews on Stephen King books, like the 0 stars, and that boosts my own confidence.
That's a great plan.
Yeah.
So what's a little bit about your background? Tell our listeners what you do for a living.
So for a living, I am a correctional officer. I have worked in that job since I was, my 20th birthday was my first day walking into a prison. So you can imagine that was pretty harrowing for a 19, 20-year-old. So I've been doing that for 15 years now, and it's been a wild ride. Worked at 5 different prisons, all different custody levels, all the way from, walking death row down to like community custody guys that are just preparing to get out of prison. So I guess almost everything there is to see in prison.
Do you find yourself in personal danger frequently? Or, I mean, people just, I think, probably assume that it's a physically demanding job, or are you going to get shanked? What's happening there with all of that?
Yeah, it definitely can be dangerous, and we're always prepared for that possibility. Mostly the reality is just a lot of sitting around and watching and waiting for something to happen. So it can be quite boring, but it can be exciting, and the excitement lasts for 30 seconds, and you have 4 hours worth of paperwork to do afterward.
Right, right. What's the craziest thing that's ever happened to you? Any kind of injuries or?
I haven't been injured on the job, thank goodness. There was one fight where there were 2 gang members going after a member of the opposite gang with a broom handle, and the inmate janitor had just mopped the floor in the foyer of the unit. And so one of my coworkers goes running out there, slips on the wet floor, and then I go running after him, and I slip on the floor. So it was a bit like Keystone Cops there for a minute. It's kind of goofy, but
Right.
and I've had deaths and attempted hangings, and people cut themselves all up with razor blades.
Oh,
And
wow.
I mean, this is still kind of a family show, so I can't go too far into it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
it's some wild stuff.
So you still enjoy it as a career?
It's a paycheck. I really can't see myself doing anything else at this point.
So what made you decide to send something in to us when we asked for these Halloween stories?
So, I was out running when I heard that call out for Halloween stories, and it just hit me right away. I'm like, I've got some pretty unique stories. We hear a lot of stories from old shut down prisons of hauntings, but I've never heard, at least not among my, peers at my job, of ghost stories from actual running current prisons. So I thought maybe these stories were a little more unique than what you might hear.
Well, they jumped out at us, and that was the first thing that we thought when we read them was you don't hear a lot about an active prison. And also your stories are they're spooky. There's some strangeness to them, and that idea that if you're interacting with a ghost or something, it's a little bit more scary when it might be the ghost of a person who was somewhat malevolent or violent in life, which there's obviously a better chance of that in prison than there is at the old saloon in an old West town or something. Well, no, that's probably not a good comparison. But
Yeah, exactly. It's, there's all sorts of people. There's people who, have murdered people, all the way down to people who bounced a check, went to prison. So you have like the whole gamut of the human experience within prisons. They're like these small little cities, right?
yeah.
And you have like a population, you have, chow hall, it's like a restaurant, you have, chapel visiting. So you have everything that they need. So this is where they're living their lives. So it's like a concentrated place where people come to, and there's a lot of people, a lot of English, like you said. It's a unique place.
Yeah. Well, if I'm running into a ghost in a prison, I'm going to prefer the check bouncer, I think. Let's get on to your stories.
Yeah, definitely. ISCI, or Idaho State Correctional Institution, or the Yard, as I'll refer to it. It's about 50 years old. It's kind of surprising that there's so much paranormal activity there, being so young, I guess you could say. So yeah, it's a medium custody facility. Like I said, it started construction in the early 60s because they knew that they would have to replace the old Idaho penitentiary. So they actually used inmate labor from the old pen, and they brought inmates out for they call it like a rehabilitation program. So they helped build their own prison. So there were a couple riots at the old pen. They burned down the chow hall and some of the other buildings, and that forced the Yard, or ICI, to open earlier than they wanted it to. Early on in the Yard's history, conditions weren't great. So there was a lack of healthcare, lack of programming. The housing units were overcrowded. There were insufficient bathroom facilities. The housing units, they were pretty much being run by the inmates who lived there. The correctional officers, like, I've read that they've never stepped on the tier sometimes. And of course, inmates were always getting beat up, injured. Violent sexual assaults were pretty common. So by the time I walked onto the Yard, the prison was pretty much being operated a lot more safely than it had been in the last few decades. There had been several lawsuits. There was a federal court that had oversight over the prison for a while. So the state made a lot of changes. So over the years, like I was talking about earlier, I dealt with a lot of brutal fights, medical emergencies, had to cut down some inmates who were attempting to hang themselves. So the training that I received from the state of Idaho helped prepare me for some of that stuff. But some of the other things that I experienced there, I can't write in an official report. So I guess that's why I'm talking to you guys today.
What would happen if you did?
I would probably get sent home.
Like most every other authoritative body, like with pilots or the military, but we're starting to see a little bit of change with that. But yeah, it's totally understandable.
Yeah, so correctional officers, we're all like police officers and military. I mean, called a paramilitary organization. So we have, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, stuff like that. So it's very like professional type organization. So, talking about this stuff officially probably wouldn't be great, but we always talk about this stuff like, there's a lot of downtime working in prison. So we always, tell each other ghost stories, and honestly, it becomes part of the folklore of a prison. And, it's kind of what we've experienced. So my first paranormal experience, I had been working there almost a decade, and I was working in a segregation unit. The official designation of the unit is called Unit 8. All the housing units at the yard are numbered, so they started at 7 and they worked their way up to 16. And I have theories about why they started at 7, but it's one of those things I'm still looking into, trying to figure out. But this housing unit, it's shaped like a giant T, basically. So upside down T, if you think about walking in their front door at the top of the T, and then there's 3 tiers that are stretched out on the legs of that T. They're labeled A tier, B tier, and C tier. And in the middle, there's a control center in that unit. So one night we had all of our work done. We're sitting there in the control center just talking. There was 3 of us shooting the breeze, and there's these big glass windows in this control center that look out onto each tier. And you can see not only there's cameras, but you can also see down those tiers from that control center. And there was nobody else on the tiers at the time, so it was just the 3 of us in the unit. We were all 3 in that control center, but we start hearing this knocking on the glass from the direction of B tier. And, of course, we all jumped up and we're looking around trying to figure out if someone had somehow snuck into the unit. Of course, there was no one else in there. And plus, we have to do tier checks in those units every 30 minutes. So we're walking those tiers every half an hour, and, we would have known if someone else was in that unit. So B tier, that's where all the activity seems to happen in that unit. I've also heard rumors where people will be standing, there's a set of showers at the front of the tier. When I say tier, I'm talking about a long, straight hallway, and there's cell doors on either side of the tier. It's not like a stacked one, like multiple stories like you see in the movies. It's just one long hallway. And so there's a set of showers at the front of the tier. And I've heard that if you stand there at night, you can hear whispering, or you can hear like a conversation between 2 disembodied voices coming out of that shower area. Of course, there's no inmates out of their cells during this time. There's nothing going on. So I haven't experienced that one in person, but I always wanted to. A few months after the window knocking incident, I was actually feeding dinner on that tier. So how that looks is you have a cart that holds all the dinner trays in it, and you have a inmate janitor, and he pulls the tray out of the cart, hands it to the officer unlocks the utility port on the cell and hands that meal to the inmate inside the cell, close the utility port, lock it up, and go down to the next one. So we're about halfway down the tier, and I'm waiting for the inmate janitor to pull out those trays from the cart so I could go to the next cell. And I'm standing in between 2 cell doors. And between the cell doors, all there is a flat, it's a pipe chase door. So if there's any plumbing issues and stuff, you can open that door and get in there. But there's no exposed handle or anything on that door. So I'm standing in front of this door, this pipe chase door, and I'm watching my inmate janitor pull out the trays from the cart. And all of a sudden I feel a hand on my back, and then it pulls up on the back of my duty belt. We wear these big heavy duty belts with our handcuffs and radio and pepper spray and all that. So this hand grabs my belt and just yanks up like it's trying to give me a wedgie almost. My first instinct was that maybe an inmate had gotten out of his cell and he's attacking me, or I'd left one of those utility ports open, because they've been known to reach out and try to grab officers through them if you don't close them right. But I turn around. Of course, I'm not standing near enough to a cell for that to even happen. But I was just standing there, and I wasn't moving at the time, so I checked, and I was far enough away from the wall that I wouldn't have been snagged on anything on that wall. There's nothing there to even snag me. So that was the first time I'd ever been touched by anything I couldn't see. So it's pretty paranoid after that one.
Did the inmate janitor that working with you, did he notice anything? Because he's got to be close by, but he's not behind you.
So yeah, he was standing to the right of me, and he was probably good 4 or 5 feet away from me. And there's that cart that has the trays in it in between us. There's another officer on the tier, but he is farther down the tier as well. Not even gonna hit. We had been talking, which was the kind of the surprising thing. So I knew exactly where he was, and we were just kind of having our idle conversation as we were working. And yeah. So about a year after that incident in segregation, where I was grabbed by the back of the belt, I was working in a general population unit, and this unit's called Unit 9. So I was walking, again, this is on B tier. I don't know if this is a coincidence or if there's something about B tier. But so at the end of the night, what we would do is when the inmates locked down for the night, we would go through, and there are these big, heavy, rolling cell doors. These were original to the prison, so they're 50 years old. We like to go through and hand check them to make sure that they've actually closed. Because they have the switches, but a lot of times they didn't close all the way, so we would make sure. So I'm going down the tier, and I'm closing, make sure all the doors are closed, go back down to the end, and then I'm coming back. I'm almost to the end of the tier, and I look down toward the office, and there's a janitor closet right there. And just as I look up, I see someone walk into that janitor closet. So as I'm walking back toward that closet, I can see that closet. It's right in front of me. So I thought one of my coworkers that I was working with at the time, he would go in and make sure all the janitor tools, the mop handles, the mop buckets, stuff like that, were all in the closets where they're supposed to be, and then we would secure them for the night. So I thought he was in that closet. So when I come in and I look around into that closet, there's nobody in there. So it was quite a startle. And then, in fact, I looked down to the tier across from me, and I could see my coworker down there, and there's only the two of us in the unit. All the inmates were locked down for the night, so there was no other movement. There was nothing going on in the unit at the time. This haunting, and I've heard several other officers talk about seeing things on this tier. One of the things I didn't put in my email is that I've heard that officers will be walking down the tier at night, and they'll shine their flashlights into a cell, but it's almost like the light doesn't penetrate into that cell, so it's like this just dark, cloudy mist that just swallows up all the light. I never experienced that one, but this tier actually does have some history behind it. Back in 1988, there was a small riot in this unit, and it didn't spread beyond the unit, so it was just the group of inmates that were on that tier, and they got drunk on prison-made alcohol. We call it squawky in Idaho. Other states call it Pruno. So they got drunk, and I guess they had tables in the day rooms that weren't bolted down at the time, and they were able to take one of those tables or a chair or something and break a hole through the cell wall. And then they took a sharpened mop handle and they stabbed the inmate that was in that cell to death. The guy who was stabbed to death in that cell was a guy named Richard Holmes, and he was in prison for his role in a murder that had happened. He actually had pled guilty to that murder, but he had two accomplices. So his accomplices felt that he ratted them out. So I guess, when they say snitches get stitches, that's, actually what happens in prison sometimes. But I guess outside the unit, there were tactical teams standing by when this happened, and they could hear him as they were waiting for their orders to go in. They could hear him being stabbed to death. He was screaming, and so that's a pretty terrible event that happened.
And that was B tier.
That was B tier, yep. And so where his cell was, where he was stabbed, was right across the hall from that janitor closet where I saw the figure walk into.
During the riot, were the prisoners ever out of the cell besides breaking the wall through? Were they ever walking free outside their cells?
Yeah, during the riot they were. So they actually broke in from the hallway into the cell.
Oh, from the hallway into the cell. So they were out and about, which means in theory, you might have seen an echo of free roaming prisoner, in theory, from the riot event, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not going to say for sure that it was Mr. Richard Holmes that I saw.
Yeah.
I kind of believe more in our surroundings record energy and the replay. I subscribe more to that theory than that there's actual conscious being, ghost beings, spirit beings among us.
Yeah, this is more of an echo, you think, kind of.
I feel like this one was, yeah.
I had read a little bit about this when you sent the story in, and I read that the murder was of an informant, that he had participated in that murder of the informant, and then, as you said, he snitched on the other two guys. But then the other thing that he had said was that he was stabbed to death by a sharpened broom handle.
Yeah.
Which might come from a janitor closet. I don't know. That's I'm just speculating on
yes,
how that might all connect. So anyway. But I mean, they would have had to have time to sharpen it, I guess. So they wouldn't have just gotten it before then.
Well, if you just break a broom handle, it's usually pretty sharp, right?
Yeah, maybe they went in there, broke it, and then went to town on Mr. Holmes. Anyway, interesting.
Somehow my experiences get even more interesting from there. We're talking about Unit 14. Unit 14 is a little different than the other two units I just described. So you walk into Unit 14 and there's this large, there's like a courtyard area, and then there's this large rolling door. You walk in, and then to your right, there's a staff office, and then there's another office to the left, and then a staff bathroom, and then the hallway kind of tees off, and there's 4 large tiers, and it's all open dorm style tiers in there. I think there's almost 200 inmates that live in just this one housing unit. The interesting thing about Unit 14 is that the paranormal activity there seems to focus on the staff areas, because you have these staff offices that, the inmates come in while we're in there, but they don't come in when we're not. So these are, where we take our breaks, eat our lunches. There's refrigerators in there, lockers, stuff like that. So one day I was sitting at the desk, and I was sitting there with one of my coworkers, and there were these 3-ring binders sitting on the desk about maybe a foot and a half away from my coworker. And we were just sitting there talking, and one of these 3-ring binders flew out off of the desk and actually hit her on the arm and then fell down to the floor to the desk. So that was kind of the first weird thing I felt in that unit, or saw in that unit. I've never seen anything fly by itself before, so that was obviously pretty impressive. But late one night, I was sitting there at the desk, and behind me was this small table that had like a coffee pot and some other stuff on it, and I had my water bottle sitting there. And all of a sudden, I was just sitting there on the computer, and the water bottle flew off and hit the floor a few feet in front of me. So it had actually gone from behind me to in front of me like 4 or 5 feet. What else? The refrigerator door, it would actually open and close on its own. I don't know if that's maybe paranormal or bad hinges or something. I don't know. Probably the craziest thing that happened, though, in that unit, aside from the flying binder, so my coworker that actually had been hit by that binder, she was working up in the control center one day. So to get to the control center, you have to walk up a flight of stairs, and then there's large windows you can see out on the tiers, but on the other side of the control center, there's a big window that looks out onto the rest of the yard. About maybe 50 or so yards away from the front of that unit, there is a guard tower right in the middle of the yard. And so this coworker, she was in this control center by herself, and she was talking on the phone with the officer in the tower. The officer in the towers, he looks at the unit, and he says to the officer working the control center, he's like, "Hey, who's that up there in that control center with you?" And she says, "There's no one up here, I'm all alone." And he says, "No, I can see someone looking out that window at me." And so she, slowly turns around and looks, and, there's no one standing there. And he says, "Oh, like that person is not there, like they stepped away from the window." When I say step away, like somewhere between the time she turned around and looked, this figure, actually, he saw the control center officer stepped away, because you can see if someone's standing right up next to the window, it's kind of partially tinted, so if you can see someone standing right there, but as soon as you step away, you can't see them anymore. So that was crazy. The other, I forgot about this one. Scott, you have that picture of the papers, right?
Yes, we're going to share that.
So one morning I get a text message from one of my coworkers who was working the graveyard shift there. She said she was sitting in the staff office again, and she was doing some paperwork, and she got up to go to the restroom. So to do that, you have to, get up, go out the office. You close that office door behind you all the time. Like, it's ingrained in our brains. Always secure that behind us, no matter if it's graveyards and there's not supposed to be any other inmates moving around. Because if you don't secure a door, the worst that could happen is a riot. The best that can happen is one of your coworkers comes in and screws with your stuff. She was the only one that had keys to that office, so keep that in mind. So she goes to the bathroom, she comes back, unlocks the door, opens it up, and she comes back to her desk to find the paperwork she was working on was stacked, but it was on its side, sitting straight up. I don't know if I'm describing that very well, but yeah, so it was like almost impossible. Like, I don't even know if I could take a stack of papers and put that up like it's shown in the picture there.
Yeah, I was going to say, when people see this, it's hard to imagine, and it's the craziest thing. So I think people have to imagine this is a stack, let's say, of maybe 40 sheets, and it's loose. There's no binding on it. It's not in a binder. It's a stack of loose papers, neatly squared off, and it's standing on the long edge, straight up. And as you said, there's a little bit of a curve to it. So it's not completely defying physics or gravity, is that there's a little bit of a curve to the paper, but not very much.
It's close to defying
It's
physics.
as close as you could probably stand it. Like I said, here's the thing that struck me when you see this photo. The pages would have to be maybe just brand new right out of the ream of paper. You know, you open up something from Office Depot and they're kind of still sticky together. You haven't flipped through them, because anything loose that you'd gone through before, these would just fall over. It's one of those things where you look at it, it's like, how is that happening? That's not how physics usually works, but there's a little bit of curve to it. So if anybody could do that, the pages would have to be, I think brand new, where they're a little stuck together, and you'd have to sit there for maybe like 5 minutes to get this thing to actually sit on edge on its long side with just a tiny bit of a curve to keep it upright. It's pretty amazing. So is that what the case was, Jeff, where these were loose papers she was dealing with that had printing on them, or were they just blank?
Yeah, they look like maybe unit rosters or something to me. Like she had just printed them out and then was going through and highlighting certain names on it.
Yeah, I can see the highlighting, and I zoomed in on it. I don't see a paperclip or staples or anything.
And I tried doing this myself to see if I could stack papers this way, and
I'm doing it right now.
Scott's doing it.
I'm going to try right now. I just got these out of a binder. Now, this is 3-hole punch. That's the only thing that's different. This paper is relatively new. I just printed this. These are instructions for a GoPro camera. I printed this about a week ago. It's been in a 3-wing binder. It's not even remotely interested in standing up on its own. I can't manipulate it into doing what it's doing in this picture.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like, maybe if you just
amazing.
Took out about 30, 40 sheets of paper and, right from the ream where it's, from the factory, it's pressed down. So there's a little bit of tack to it with each sheet. Maybe you could get it to do that after, maybe 30 seconds a minute. Yeah. It doesn't seem very easy to do. They're just going to fall over. So
now see, I'm doing a little bit, but I had to bend it really hard in the middle, and there is no crease of any kind on this stack. And some of them fell down. Yeah, it takes skill. It's like when you were a kid in school and you tried to balance the chair in the back of the classroom while the teacher wasn't looking. It was really hard to do. But anyway.
You know how we're always saying that even just working on and designing your own Squarespace website can be a lot of fun?
Oh, yeah, it is. No, wait, are you rescinding that claim?
Not by a darn sight. Well, I was going to say that maybe some people think that if you're not one of those creative types or one who doesn't like computer work, it doesn't seem like fun, but I'm here to change your mind.
Go on.
All right. Well, you might think that you need a lot of skills or knowledge to build your own website, or that it's going to be frustrating, and that's not the case with Squarespace. Okay, so maybe web design isn't your first choice of activity, but what I'd bet is that you'll love the significant increases in your marketability, audience engagement, and profits. If that's your thing, or donations, whatever your deal is, they got you covered. So no matter what you're doing, a blog, a band, you got crafts or merch to sell, you do consulting work, Squarespace is everything you need to build your brand and look good doing it.
Well, who doesn't like increased success and profits?
Precisely. You probably thought I was going to say exactly. Well, what I am going to say is a Squarespace website is just built up of, yes, squares. Get it?
No.
Well, blocks are what they call them for the most part, but all you need to do is choose what you like from a ton of gorgeous templates, then start adding the blocks you want depending on your offerings. And it could be the usual text, videos, pics, audio, of course, or you could insert one of their functionality blocks, like for menus or reservations or events powered by Talk, product listings, member sign up, or scheduling for your business.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? They have block tools for integration with Instagram and Twitter, bands in town, or SoundCloud, if music is your thing. Manage your restaurant with OpenTable. Plug in a Zola block if you have a wedding coming up. And here's something fun. With Foursquare's Swarm integration, you can check in with all your locations and connect with your peeps to coordinate your adventures.
Yeah, like some families like to do Pokemon or geocaching. See, I told you it was fun. See for yourself by heading on over to squarespace.com/legends for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code LEGENDS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
After going through so many of our listeners' most freaky stories for us, what would you say is one of the main overriding elements?
That's easy. Often at the core is fear. I mean, duh, we ask for scary stories, but...
But what is fear exactly? What is the nature of fear and how should we deal with it?
Precisely, my dear fellow. And to answer that question, we only need to go to our most trusted source for our biggest questions and best answers, Wondrium.
Yeah, the series called Understanding and Overcoming Fear, as the description suggests, instead of considering fear as a toxic, destructive force that needs to be defeated, there's a way to handle it as an emotion with tremendous upsides in the right circumstances.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that everyone can easily identify fear, but it's actually not an easy concept to define. In this first lesson, sociologist Dr. Margee Kerr, who, by the way, is also a consultant for the Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site, one of the most haunted places in the U.S., breaks down the acute threat construct.
That's right. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight or flight, but also prepares us for anything that produces stress.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, though, when someone experiences extreme fear, like during a supernatural event, and maybe why you can't understand what is happening, is that part of our response to threat is a reprioritization of attention. Basically, critical and abstract thought takes a backseat to all of our systems that are working to make sure we survive.
Because the purpose of fear is to keep us alive.
Right.
There's also a critical distinction between our threat response, what is automatically happening in our body, and the emotional experience of fear. The threat response is universal, but the intensity and reaction to it depend on the person.
Right. Well, some people have fun with fear, like with roller coasters and haunted houses. Look, the world is full of scary stuff, but if you can let it flow through you and not consume you, with the many ways to manage and overcome fear, you can embrace the upsides of fear, and you can emerge empowered, confident, and even have a little fun with it.
We're having fun learning all about it, and we know you'll love Wondrium as much as we do. And right now, we have a special limited time offer for our listeners.
Sign up using our special URL to get 50% off your first 3 months of Wondrium. That's half off when you sign up for your first quarterly plan. That's a fantastic deal.
That is a great deal. Go now to wondrium.com/legends to take advantage of this great offer.
Again, that's WONDRIUM.com/legends.
Wondrium.com/legends.
I'm Paul Strouk, and when I'm not on my sailing yacht searching for the Loch Ness Monster, I'm listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
What did your coworker do? And was that the same one who had the binder hit her arm?
No, it's a different coworker, but she freaked out. Working graves, she had the opportunity to see a lot of things. Supposedly, she saw a staff member walking through the courtyard of the unit, and there's a big, heavy door that only the control center officer can operate, and somehow that staff member was now inside the unit, even though that door was closed. And then after that, they didn't see this person, the staff member, anymore. And the weird thing, I thought about that story was that we had switched our uniforms from the old kind of police officer style uniforms, the polyester, to the newer khaki pants and polo shirts. We had switched those maybe a year before this happened. And that vision of a staff member, like I said, was wearing those newer uniforms, not the old uniforms like you would expect. Maybe, so I don't know what to make of that one.
Interesting.
That's almost like a random doppelganger. Like I said, it's something, whatever it's choosing to appear as, or it's just an echo of sorts. It is in the newer uniform, not the ghost of some old guard that worked there years ago, who would have been, you'd think, wearing the old uniform. So that's pretty interesting. But definitely everyone was accounted for. It was just an image of a more current guard walking through.
I guess sometimes they portray themselves as we want to see them, right?
In terms of it being a staff member, was the uniform the only recognizable thing, or did they see someone that looked familiar to them?
Yeah, from the angle that you're looking at in the distance, it's hard to tell who's who unless you can recognize how they walk or something like that, which, you get to know how people walk working with them this closely for so long. But yeah, they said they didn't know who it was. And we'd have staff members from other facilities because Now you have not only have the yard, but you have 3 other facilities right there that have been built after the yard. And so you'd have other officers from other facilities come work overtime and help out when staffing is low and stuff like that. So you didn't always recognize everyone right off.
Were there any of the apparitions that people saw, did anybody there as part of the lore have any idea of a name or somebody other than Richard Holmes, somebody who would be connected to something? It's like one of the old offices I worked at. There'd always been very small things happening, and then, nobody talks about it. I'd had a few weird things, but nothing major, and you pass that off. And then I started talking to the facility manager, the building manager. And he said, like, oh, yeah, I call that George. Whoever that is, like, for whatever reason that name came into me, I just call him George. And then, the night guard will hear the push bar rattle, the conference room door. And it's like, of course, there's nobody in there. The janitorial staff, they had a lot of people who quit. And I didn't know anything about this. I mean, I worked there maybe 10 years or more off and on, and the vacuum would stop and they go and the plug has been taken out. And so he said, well, why'd you call him George? He said, well, there was a guy here who he worked here for a while, and he had a heart attack. Not there, I think, but he, was a hardworking guy. He'd always be there late. And he said that wasn't his name, but for whatever reason, I got this feeling this guy's named George. Is there anybody, though, in the poltergeist activity or the apparitions that people have seen there, any connection to a living person through history or just gut feeling?
Okay, so I've heard some stories where officers have connected a certain cell and something weird that's happened in the cell to a certain inmate who maybe passed away in that cell. So yeah, I've heard stuff like that. More to like naming something like George. And this last unit, Unit 13, it's one of the newer units. It was built in the 90s. But the entity that's in that unit, one of my coworkers nicknamed him Solomon. And I don't know why he picked Solomon, but it was like George. He just had a gut feeling that maybe it was named, that it was its name. To that, there's this kind of weird phenomenon is when you name something, it gives it power, right? So after Solomon got his name, or we started calling him Solomon, it seemed like the activity in this unit actually picked up and got more intense.
And so what is your story about? This is your Unit 13 story, right?
Yeah, so Unit 13, it's this weird unit. You walk into the unit, and it's like this foyer area, and then there's tiers off to your left and right, and there's like 8 tiers, and then in the foyer area, there's a little control center. So you walk in the control center, and then right in front of you, there's a spiral staircase that goes down to the basement. So, spiral staircases are weird anywhere, right, when you're walking up and down them. But I've heard several stories. I had one of my inmate janitors was standing in the door of that control center talking to the officer, and he could see out of his peripheral vision down into the basement area, and he swears that he saw someone walk by down there. Now, this is the type of basement you don't go down to unless you absolutely have to. It's dark, it's dank, it's musty. There's always water leaking down there. I was always half afraid I was going to get electrocuted stepping into a water puddle or something down there. But of course, they went down and looked. There was no one down in there. And I've heard that story a couple times where people have seen something down there. And when I was working in there, I could always hear footsteps walking up and down the stairs behind me. And that was really a heart stopper every time, because it sounded like there was someone else in there with me. And I'd sit alone in this control center, except for when I went to do tier checks, and there's no one else that would come in his unit for hours at a time. So, hearing those footsteps was always chilling. Hear kind of snippets of voices once in a while too. As far as that goes, I couldn't tell if that was actually something that I was hearing, or maybe, inmates were getting a little loud out on the tier, stuff like that. So the voices, I'm not really convinced was anything special or paranormal. I just, it's kind of a little weird when you're sitting there by yourself and you start hearing voices. So probably the strangest thing that happened to me in this unit, and I was sitting in this little control center, and the doors are operated by switches in this unit. It's older kind of control panel. So we're just sitting there talking, and all of a sudden these switches start switching by themselves. So you could hear the doors to all the tiers popping by themselves. You hear the pop of the lock as, the electronic locks as you hit the switch. And so it was click, 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 click for, maybe 20, 25 seconds, something like that. There's 8 doors plus a front door, so there's 9 different switches that were going by themselves all at once. You have to physically move these switches. It's not like an electronic touchscreen or anything like that, so you have to flick them up and down to operate these doors.
Are these rocker type switches, like the plastic rocking back and forth, or are they more towards something like the metal post, the old switches you see on electrical equipment where they have to physically move, though?
So they're the kind of the rocker switches. So you flicked it down or up, depending on which side, and then it would go back into place by itself. So it was on a spring,
That's an analog switch. There's no digital components to the switch. Yeah, that has to be physically switched.
Are you actually seeing these switches move on their own?
Yeah, so my back was to the control panel, so I didn't see the switches, if they were moving by themselves or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd worked in this unit for 2.5 years at this point and never experienced anything like that before. Not even one at a time switching by itself, which, if that were to happen, like I would say, okay, it's an electrical issue or,
Right.
There's a mechanical explanation for this. But
Were those doors releasing any inmates or were they changing any circumstances?
No. So fortunately, this unit is a worker unit, so they're always pretty well behaved, and they have jobs, so they don't want to they're making the most money that an inmate can work while working there. So they have a lot of incentive to not do anything crazy.
It unlocked doors for them. They could have departed their cells, but they didn't.
Yep, they could have.
Wow.
Did that stir any inmates? What did they say? Because this is all their doors, right? Clicking open and shut again.
So I did have one, I think he was my janitor. He asked me about it the next day. He's like, hey, were you guys messing with the doors last night? I'm like, we weren't. Something was.
Oh, jeez.
Do the inmates have any stories?
Right before I left working there, I had a death in my unit, in Unit 13. He was actually a co-defendant of Richard Holmes, so it's kind of this weird connection there.
Okay.
He had been ill. He'd been pretty sick. He actually, was, we'd see him out there. He was saying his goodbyes and stuff. So he was expecting to pass away soon. He had a lot of health issues. COVID screwed up everything as far as staffing goes. So I had been pulled out of the unit and I was made a response officer. So my job was just to kind of walk around all the units, make sure everything's okay. If there's an emergency, I would respond to it. So since it was the unit that I was supposed to be assigned to, I still felt the, sense of ownership there. So I would go in there and make sure, breakfast got fed appropriately, everything was going right. So I'm in that control center, and the other officer working the unit, he's feeding breakfast to the tiers. And all of a sudden he rushes into the control center and he's like, hey, they're saying this guy's dead. I'm like, okay. So we go out there, and long story short, we end up doing CPR on the guy for like an hour, and the EMTs get there and pronounce him dead. But after that, all the guys on that tier kept telling me that they kept seeing him looking out of his cell window at them, like for another 3 or 4 months after that. So yeah, there's stories like that I've heard. I've heard plenty of stories of so when we count, you have a piece of paper and you have to mark each cell and how many inmates are in that cell. So I've heard stories of officers, they swear that there was an inmate on that bunk when they counted, but they go back to double check, there's nobody there. So I hear stories like that. The inmates, they tell me all the time that they hear voices and yelling in the open dorm situations. Like I had one inmate asked me, he's like, hey, who's yelling? Why is it so loud in here? And I'm like, I didn't hear anything. I'm standing like right outside the door here. I didn't hear anything, things like that.
I have a question about when you got the tug on your belt upward on your utility belt. Was it forceful enough that it altered your footing a little? Did you have to take a step to maintain your balance?
It was gentler than that, but like I said, like I physically reacted to it and spun around because I thought I was being, grabbed by an inmate.
Wow. So all these stories that you've sent, how many different facilities do they represent?
That was just the one facility that I worked at most of my time. There's a story from the minimum custody facility that I kind of teased at the end of my email. So this minimum custody facility, when I worked there, we were switching over. So it used to be a male housing unit. Now it houses females. So we switched that over. And then after I left, there was another housing unit that they decided to switch over to a female unit. And when they did this, there was supposedly a male entity in that unit that hated women. these female inmates would have scratch marks on their bodies, typical kind of poltergeist activity, things moving around on their own, stuff like that. So there's this group of ladies, inmates, who got together and they all identified as witches. So they put together some healing spells and cast out whatever this demon or poltergeist or whatever activity was in this unit. They were able to cast it out, I guess.
So that worked. Whatever they did worked. They stopped getting bothered.
I guess so, yeah. And again, I wasn't there when that happened, so that's secondhand information, but
yeah,
it's quite a story.
Yeah, that is quite a story.
Anything happened to you recently in the facilities that you've been working at? Do you think anything has followed you into your regular life?
Other than a little PTSD?
Yeah. Imagine that.
So the facility I work at now it's pretty new. It was built in the early 90s, so it's only about 30 years old, which I don't know. I've heard some stories from there. Last year on Super Bowl Sunday, there was an inmate that passed away, and I've heard that the cell he was in is haunted now. I haven't experienced anything or seen anything. I've only been working in that facility for about a year now, so I haven't really seen anything there, and nothing's really followed me home. It's funny that you mentioned that because I was actually thinking about that the other day. It's like, ghost hunters, they're always worried about something attaching to them and coming home with them. And I'm like, I used to live in that or work in that environment for, 12 to 16 hours a day, and fortunately, nothing ever came home with me.
Well, I want to thank you for sending your stories into us. They're compelling. Also, I love the photo, and it's really interesting that this stuff is going on in these active facilities where people are still around. But I guess the high traffic locations tend to have more activity, hotels, travel hubs.
And a lot of intense human emotional energy, violent sorrow, misery, those kind of things, that turns up the volume, it seems. And of course, if you watched any ghost shows, you know that prisons are one of the things they like to hunt more so because you get a lot more activity, and it can be a lot more violent in a sense, and just the responses you get if you believe in ghost hunting at all. But, prisons, churches, hospitals, theaters, any place that has a lot of traffic, as Scott said, and a lot of intense emotional energy do seem to have more reports, at least, of some kind of paranormal activity. So I think that so far, this is the only prison ghost story. So it's one of the classics of the genre. And it was great for you to come on and tell your personal stories here. And odd things do seem to happen. And even though they don't go reported, it is part of the job, too. There's a lot of sitting around and talking because once you've done your duties, there's a lot of time that passes. And so sharing these stories is just part of the job, it seems.
It really is. It's like I said, it's kind of becomes the folklore of the prison. And I was doing some research on some folklore stuff this year, and I realized that occupational folklore is a thing, and connected that together. And I guess a lot of jobs and things like that have their own set of folklore, and I'm glad I could contribute a little bit of my own to this.
Well, listen, before you go, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about Ida History and your partner? You guys have a book out too, just recently, right?
Yeah, so Mark Iverson, he's my business partner and co-author. So I met Mark actually about 2 years ago, this October. He used to work for the city of Boise. He used to do tours for the city as the part of the arts and history department. And people started asking him, what happened in this building? Anything crazy? This looks like it should be haunted. And then it kind of sparked an idea in his brain to start a macabre history of Boise walking tour. So he's been doing the macabre history of Boise for about 3 years now. And that's how I met him. One of our mutual friends had posted on Facebook. So I'm like, I'm going to go check that out. Seems right up my alley. So I did the tour with him. Previously to that, I had done a podcast on my own called Cascadia, History of the Pacific Northwest. And then I published my first book called Brave as a Lion, Jeff Standifer and the Knights of the Golden Circle, which is influenced by a couple guys I know.
That's great.
And so it's a biography about this guy named Jeff Standifer, who was a member of the KGC, and he was working kind of in the Idaho Pacific Northwest area during the Civil War. And then after he left Idaho, he went down to California, and he's helping men get from California back to Texas to join the Confederate Army.
Okay.
So he has a crazy story. And then, so I got to joking with Mark. I'm like, hey, so when you're ready to write the macabre history of Boise book, I'll write it with you. And then, it was like a year and a half after that, we just published Murder and Mayhem in Boise together. And you can find that on Amazon and all the regular places. So we worked with a publishing company called the History Press, which if you go into any museum in the United States, you'll see books by the History Press in there. But yeah, it's just a collection of kind of historical true crime type stories, crazy stuff, that happened in Boise. And then we're following it up next year with a book called Haunted America Boise. So we're looking at some of these ghost stories and stuff like that. So we do our macabre history of Boise walking tour, and then the macabre history of Nampa, which is a small town near Boise. And then we also just purchased a vehicle to do auto tours, and it's a great, I don't know if you saw it on our website, it's a 1978 GMC Kingsley motorhome. It's burnt orange with
Nice.
the shag carpet and everything, and it's a beautiful vehicle. But yeah, we're doing some auto tours in that now.
Oh, that's great. Well, we'll have a link to that on the show page.
Go see what these fellows are doing, because they have really good social media offerings as well on Instagram. And where else can people find you on social media? I think you guys have a Facebook page.
Yeah, so we're on Facebook at Ida History, Instagram at Ida History, and then you can find our tours and such at idahistory.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking at the RV right now. That is amazing. It's very space age. I love it.
With a big bubble window in the front.
Yeah, that's the best. Thanks again for coming on and and contributing to this year's series of Halloween stories. We really appreciate it. Well, Jeff made a joke about that, but that's a full-blown physical assault by something unseen. We talked about that kind of stuff on the show, but that is super rare in the paranormal world. There's definitely something very creepy about a ghost choosing to hang around an active prison too. Well, but, maybe that's just how it works in a case of a sudden loss of life. I don't know, because, you have that one inmate who was murdered, and maybe that was the residual thing that Jeff saw going into the closet. But then the physical wedgie situation is something different. I don't know.
All I know is that not everyone can say they got a wedgie from a ghost. All right, so how about the next story here? I like this story a lot because of the person who tells it.
Yeah.
And another thing I liked about this story is the atmosphere, but I also like the position of having to deal with something you may not totally believe in, and then it rocks your world a little bit. Some people who hear the story might say, well, maybe he had to be there, but I would say that for somebody, our storyteller Molly, who was there, and the people who received, let's say, the party favor of sorts, this really changed their lives. And you now have to come to grips with, as they say, are you going to believe your own lying eyes? Or are you still going to hang on to what you've been taught? And in this case, our storyteller is Molly, and she is a surgeon, scientific, rational thinker, to us, extremely credible. And that's what we're all looking for, right? Somebody who's got some professional chops that are based solidly in science, but also deal with that part of life and death that is, right there at the line. The other thing I like about this is that I don't know if she really believes in the tarot cards. Maybe that's changed now, but she finds them fun and appreciates just them as an art and kind of a hobby and something fun to do. And there's a bit of theater in it. And she will admit to leaning into that theater and drama. Because I've also seen with just a lot of people, it doesn't matter if you're in the science background or what you believe in, really like Halloween. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I grew up, of course, one of my favorite holidays, although I like them all. But this one includes candy and dressing up and doing fun, spooky things. It's not just for silly people. So I love that part of it. But she's also a very rational thinker. And here's what I liked about the angle of the story. So you might be playing around with the tarot cards and you say, well, I don't believe in any of this stuff. It's just for fun. But what if it doesn't matter if you believe in the tarot cards? They have other plans.
So, folks, we would like to welcome Molly Jane to the show, who sent in a great story during our call for stories. And Molly, you might not know this, but it's funny. We had asked for listeners to send stories in the past. We got a few dozen, several dozen, 30, 40. For this Halloween stories submission, we've got probably over 100 stories now that have come in, and we're looking at every single one of them. Yeah. How many, Forrest?
Well, I think as of today, we're over 100, but they keep trickling in because, of course, people don't all listen to the episodes at the same time. And if you hadn't heard the Missing 411 series, you may not have known there was a call for stories, but it's just weird that we're getting so many, but also very delightful because, again, this is why we started the podcast, to hear other people's strange stories. And
before we ask you to tell the story, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background, maybe how long you've been listening to Astonishing Legends, that sort of thing. What brought you to us?
So I have been listening to you all since the very beginning of your show.
Oh, wow.
That was actually when I was just fresh out of residency. I'm a general surgeon, and I was actually doing some traveling work as a locums physician for a while. And so podcasts were what kept me sane. And you guys were actually one of the first podcasts that I really subscribed to and have stuck with ever since. So getting to come here is I'm going to fangirl out a little bit for you.
Please go ahead.
Well, we're excited to have you.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody says they've been with us the whole time, I'm always like, because, it's been a haul and we've changed a lot, hopefully for the better. At least it's always nice to hear that people are staying with us and not be like, oh, this show hadn't been good since 2015, or whatever. So,
oh, absolutely not.
Thank you.
Yeah, yep.
As you said in your story here, being a surgeon and a person of science and logic and reason, being able to quantify all this stuff, how are you enjoying this show at all? It's like our friend Chris Cogswell. We tease him a lot.
Oh yeah, Chris is great.
Yeah, and he's got a great show of his own, the Mad Scientist podcast, and he's got a PhD in chemistry and I think some with applied chemistry practice, and he just loves the subject matter. And not that he shoots everything down, he doesn't, but of course he wants to approach it with a rational scientific viewpoint at first. And then whatever's left over, it's like, well, that's an unknown perhaps. So I do appreciate his viewpoint, but then we always tease him. It's like, why are you even listening to any of this woo-woo stuff? It doesn't make any sense. So I'll put that question to you.
Yeah, and I'm kind of right there with him with that, where yes, I am an arch skeptic. I don't believe most things, but the stories are still fun, even if I don't 100% believe them. It's still just enjoyable to go for the ride.
Right.
But
that's great.
And like all skeptics, when we get into these paranormal stories, we got to drop that big old butt on the table. But there's mine, is that there are things that have happened since I have moved up to where I am in New England right now that I have approached from the most rational, scientific, everything I can think of, and they don't fit. I don't know. But at the end of the day, they happened. And sometimes there are very concrete things, and it's like, I can't explain that away. So that's the fascinating part. It doesn't mean that it's paranormal. I don't necessarily think that, but whatever. It's still, this thing has happened, and I need to figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, so let's hear your story, and then we may ask you some questions along the way. We'll try not to interrupt too much, and when it's done, we maybe have a few more questions for you. But whenever you're ready to share it, we are ready to hear it.
Okay, so all of this kind of centers around the fact that in addition to what I do for a day job, I have a lot of hobbies involving crafting, costuming, stuff like that. And Halloween is my jam. So my favorite holiday, I throw a big party every single year, friends, coworkers, family, everybody come to it, and decorate everything up. So I kind of have to describe where I live a little bit. So we're in New England in a super rural part. I don't actually live that far from my hospital where I work. I'm about a 10-minute drive, but you would not be able to tell that you were anywhere near civilization when you're at my house, because it's this farmhouse out in the middle of the woods. We're actually not far off of a main road, but my driveway looks like an old logging trail. So most people do not know there's a house back there, which is fine. I'm great with that. I actually abut one of the state parks. So even though my property is 40 acres, there's several hundred more acres around me that is just woodland. And my closest neighbor is a bear. So
sounds idyllic.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love it. But yeah, the closest people to me are about a half a mile away by the road and maybe a quarter mile if you hike straight through the woods. So I'm on my own out there. But that makes it great for this Halloween party because I decorate up the whole length of this dark driveway, the dark yard, the forest around it, Halloween maze in the basement one year, and just decorate the whole house up, themed foods, costumes, the whole deal.
Is it a large house?
Yeah, it's a pretty decent sized house. It's 2 stories plus the basement, about 3,000 square feet total, plus a huge garage, and then my chicken coops and stuff like that that's around it too.
Okay, gotcha.
So this particular incident happened at one of my Halloween parties. It was actually the very first one that we did. And ever since I have moved into this house, there have been a number of those, I can't rationalize this, I can't explain it away. And this one was one that was a little less concrete than some of them have been, but was still pretty weird. So, of course, we get the party kicked off. There's people coming. And my favorite thing to do at these kind of parties is to go into my little dining room area, which is it's more like a breakfast nook area, but it's just off the kitchen, but it's separate from the rest of the house. And we put up lace curtains and curtains on the windows, and we decorate it with a bunch of spooky things like weird taxidermied animals and stuff that you find at secondhand stores, creepy dolls, whatever, and get the candles going, get the black lights going. And then I've dressed up that particular year kind of a Dia de los Muertos thing. So I had the sugar skull face paint and a bodysuit with a skeleton on it and a top hat. And I go in there and invite all my friends, if they want, to come into the voodoo lounge, as we call it, and you can have your fortune told. So sometimes we mess around with a Ouija board. Sometimes it's rune stones. This particular year, everybody wanted to do tarot. I was pretty excited because I had just gotten a new deck of tarot cards. And these weren't anything amazing that I got at, a flea market or anything like that. They were just from Spirit Halloween. But I really loved them because they had mythological creatures on them. So it was all the major and minor arcana cards, but they all had either cryptids or a mythological animal or aliens or something on them like that. And I'm a total nerd about that stuff. So to me, this is fun because then I can kind of play off of whatever's on the card when I'm giving my reads. So I don't actually believe that I'm doing anything magical when I do some kind of a tarot read or runes or anything like that. It's a subjective thing. It's very psychological, and I'm also pretty good at cold reading. So it's a really good place for me to kind of play around and mess with people. And like I said in my story, cold reading is actually a big part of my career. So when you come in to see a surgeon, it's not because things are going great in your life. Something's going on. And so every day I'm meeting strangers, first time they've ever laid eyes on me, first time they've ever talked to me. Sometimes it's on the worst day of their life. I'm giving them bad news. A family member's got bad news, whatever it is. And I have to convince them through verbal, nonverbal means, everything else to work with me here. So what that means is, you're going to agree to let me and my friends knock you out, and I'm going to cut on you. And maybe we're taking stuff out. Maybe we're putting things in, whatever it is, you have to really trust me. And so I have to convince you that this is a good idea. So cold reading is kind of helpful there because I can tell people's moods. I can kind of change my affect, change my voice tone, whatever it is that's going to make them feel more comfortable and just get that rapport going. So that's really important to my career, but it's also fun to use in tarot reading. And in these cases, these people that I'm doing these reads for, these are my friends, they're my coworkers. So this isn't cold reading, this is hot reading.
Right.
So I can use these cards to kind of tell a story or talk to them about something through the cards, basically. So, for instance, that particular year, one of my best friends was actually looking at changing jobs. She was another physician, and she hadn't made that announcement yet. She didn't want anybody to know quite yet. But she'd been reaching out to a physician group in another city, and one of their group members actually contacted me kind of a back channel and asked me for a reference. And so, of course, I hadn't known anything about this, and my friend didn't know that they were doing this. This is a little bit of it's a dirty pool thing that we do sometimes. But it's like, okay, cool. So I gave her a good reference. But then I decided I was going to hold that over her because she didn't tell me. So when she came in and got her read, I made the cards say things like, oh, you got this horrible secret. You're holding this secret. And oh my gosh, your friends are going to be so worried if they, didn't know this secret. And you need to tell us the secret because otherwise calamity. And I just started messing with her through it. And after a while, she kind of went from being like, oh crap, how do you know, to, oh, you're screwing with me. You're messing with me.
Right.
And then she was like, oh, okay. But she couldn't say anything. She couldn't call me out on it because then everybody else would know what the secret was.
Yeah.
That's great.
Or another friend was having some family stuff going on. So I kind of used the cards to talk to her in a way to be like, hey, don't worry so much about what your family's saying. You should do what makes you happy. Those kind of things. So.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like Mothman, it seems like you can have second sight and you can see the future, but you just have a different perspective. And in this case, you had information that was unknown.
Exactly.
Which made it seem like you could intuit things.
Yes, exactly. So, and the more you get into the acting part of it and stuff and really kind of play it up, and of course, by now everybody's had a few drinks and a lot of, food, and it's dark and the mood and everything. It's like you can really get to playing around with this. So it turns into a little bit of a LARP, and that's fine. That's fun.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
This year was the first year that another coworker of ours came to the party, and we're going to call her Lisa. And she and I have worked together forever. We're not super close friends by any means, but we hang out all the time. She's this very outgoing, bubbly person, and she's lived in this town for her entire life. And like she and her husband met when they were kindergartners, and that's just how their lives have been. Everybody knows them. They know everybody, really just kind of tight in the community. And this was the first time that she'd come to one of my parties, and she was having a great time, but she decided she wanted to get her fortune told too. And her husband was actually a retired school teacher. I will throw that detail in there. So he was very, like, even more of a skeptic than me. So like, no, this is BS, whatever. And he was almost kind of trying to talk her out of doing it, but she's like, dude, it's just for fun. Just let me have my fortune told.
What's
Like,
the
this is just for
harm?
fun.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So we go in and sit down to do her read. And the way I always set up these reads is, we go into the spooky parlor, the mood, everybody, I'm in costume, all this fun stuff. And I take the deck myself and I shuffle it. And then I hand it to the person that wants the read. And I tell them to really focus on their question or the problem or whatever it is that they want the cards to tell them about. And then I tell them to feel the deck and kind of feel the energy of the deck. It's a little woo, but it's like, okay, and if it feels good, okay, great, that's what we will deal from. But if you don't feel like it quite feels right, then I tell them shuffle it yourself until you feel like it's right.
Is that like a standard tarot procedure, or is that just something that you do for yourself?
No, this is my own made up thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like it though. All
Yep.
right.
I have heard of that before, and I've heard of people who do a lot of tarot readings don't like to let other people handle the cards too much, because they claim is that you're diffusing the connection that the reader has to the deck, that there is something tactile there, some kind of psychometry, something happening, where that is important. And if you let other people handle it too much, it's like having a dog that lives in a big house with like in college, is that after a while the dog doesn't come to anybody. There's nobody,
it's not your dog anymore.
No.
Yeah. Whereas for me, I feel like the other way around. That's just kind of my take on it. And again, I know I'm putting on a show. So that's kind of the fun part to me, is like, it doesn't matter what I do. And this sounds kind of woo-ish, so this is what we do. So I tried to shuffle the deck for Lisa. And I told her to focus on what the question is in your mind. And my best guess about what she was going to be thinking about, because again, Lisa's a very outgoing person and she talks a lot. So you usually know what she's thinking. And based on stuff that she had been saying, because her husband had just retired and she's, middle-aged herself, it's like I was betting she was kind of looking at retiring herself. So I figured I would kind of base my read around, well, here's some things to consider. And honestly, I didn't want her to retire. So I was going to kind of work that in a little bit. It's like, are you sure? Are you sure that's the right move? Because she does a lot of good stuff for our office. But anyway, so I start to try to shuffle the cards for her, kind of thinking this is what I'm going to do. This is my game plan. And I could not get the cards to shuffle. This is not a brand new deck. I've been shuffling this thing before the party. I've been shuffling it all night at the parties, working fine. I've had a couple drinks, but I'm not that far gone. I'm trying to shuffle this deck, and it's like it's been glued together. Like these cards will not shuffle correctly. So I end up kind of putting it under the tablecloth and kind of doing that, you take half the deck and kind of mash it together like a little kid does who doesn't know how to shuffle. So I kind of did that just to get it back into a pile. And I handed it to Lisa and said, okay, feel the energy of this deck. Does this feel shuffled right to you? And she handled it for a bit and said, nope, this doesn't feel right at all. So I said, okay, you go ahead and shuffle it then. And immediately she just shuffles it like no big deal. Just Vegas card shark style. She's got it all shuffled up, and she did it a few times and said, okay, now it feels right. Okay. So I take it back from her and I deal it out. I always do it the same way. I know there's a lot of different ways to deal out the cards and how to kind of interpret the layout, but the one that I use, just because it's simple, is a cross pattern. So the first card that you deal out face up is the guest. It represents them, or the person that's getting the read done. And then you lay another one just perpendicular across it. And that's supposed to represent the actual question or the problem or whatever this person is seeking.
How did you come by this knowledge of how to do the reading?
When I was a teenager who was super into Wicca and things like that. So this is stuff that I'm pulling from the way back machine.
Very good.
I'm 40 now, so this is pulling from the way back and kind of, once again, doing my own little spin on things.
Sure. Yeah.
So the first card's the guest. The second one is the question. And then you put one in all four cardinal directions around that cross. And those are the past, the present, the future. And then there's a card called the adversary, which is just, this is the major thing holding you back from whatever you're trying to do. And then you deal 4 more cards off to the side. And those are just kind of other factors for this person to consider when they're trying to figure out what the path is going to be. And the idea of this particular spread is that this is not telling you exactly what is going to happen. It's telling you where the compass arrow is pointed right now, if you will. So this is what could happen if you do not do something to change it. It doesn't tell you what would happen if you change something, but it's kind of a butterfly effect a little bit sort of thing, where it's like, this is what will maybe happen unless you change something, is the idea of this spread. And again, I'm kind of playing off the monsters or the mythological animals that are on these cards, because that kind of gives me some things to work off of. And going by the meanings of the cards, both the traditional definition and also kind of playing with the mythological stuff, I was trying really hard to make this, again, about retirement, about changes and, okay, the kind of the ending of things and stuff like that. And so one of the cards that came up right straight out the gate was the death card. And everybody that does tarot will tell you, okay, death doesn't mean death, but it means an ending. And that sometimes actually does mean death, but it's implying an ending of something. So
could it also mean a big change? I've heard that too, is that it could be just a big change is coming, a transition, like death.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yep. An ending, a transition. So I'm like, perfect. I can work off of that. That was like the very first thing that came out. I think that was the one that was the crosswise card, was the death card. So I'm like, okay, this is perfect. I'm gonna use this to talk about retirement. And that's what I'm thinking. But as I'm starting to deal more of the cards out, it's Charybdis, it's aliens, it's these different cards, but they're all by the traditional meanings, and by even going off the animals on the cards, it's chaos. It's not just a change, but like, oh my God, something really crazy is about to happen, something really, truly life-altering, something really bad is coming. And I'm trying to spin this as being like, oh, this isn't saying that retirement is going to be bad, or, whatever. But I'm trying to find a kind of a more positive spin on these cards, but it's like, oh, okay, wow. And as I'm trying to figure out how to tell her something other than, buckle up, Buttercup, the power goes out. 10 o'clock at night in the dark northern woods, there is no lights anywhere, just all of a sudden, just horror movie blackout. Now, luckily I have a generator, and it automatically kicks in when this happens, because it happens not infrequently. But this time it took its dear sweet time kicking in. It took a good 30 seconds when it normally takes about 10. So we're all just kind of sitting there in the perfect dark, unable to really move or do anything, except for like there's a little bit of candlelight.
Oh, I was going to ask. I was hoping there would be candles, like in a very spooky mood. There would be a few candles that were still lit, and everyone's
a little bit of candles, but mostly the battery ones, because everybody's been drinking.
That's a good idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah. We think these things through a little bit. So no open flames, but
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically
That's
we have battery powered candles is the only thing that's glowing right now, and so there's not much that you can see. And finally the generator kicks in and the lights come back on, and everyone's like, oh, phew. But about that time, everybody starts going, it's getting late. It's time to go home. So I had to kind of be like, okay, I got to go be a good hostess and send everybody off and give them their doggy bags and stuff. But Lisa still really wanted me to finish up this read. So I kind of gave her this sort of as good as I could, like, oh, big changes are coming, kind of watch out. But I didn't, I was no longer really had my heart into doing the full act. And again, this was kind of weirding me out all the way around.
Okay, so in the moment, it felt weird. It wasn't like a hindsight thing. It felt weird even while it was happening.
Yes, yeah. Between the deck acting weird, that was one of the first things that kind of just, like, this is strange. But then seeing those cards and not being able to really come up with a good spin for them, and I'm thinking, well, again, rational mind, I'm like, well, I'm getting tired. It's getting later at night. I'm not on my game as far as this acting stuff. And also, it didn't kind of help, too. Her husband, the arch skeptic who was standing behind her, kind of ribbing me and ribbing her the whole time, too. So I'm kind of like, okay, you're getting me out of the mood here a little bit. Then the blackout happens, and it's like, everything about this was starting to be like, okay, I'm kind of over this. I'm done with this. So I wanted to hurry up and finish the read, get my guests home. One of my friends was going to stay the night, so just kind of getting everything sorted and settled. So I gave her this vanilla read that I could with it about big changes. And I could kind of tell she was disappointed. She didn't feel like she'd gotten that good of a read. I could tell, because she's not got the best poker face. But she's like, okay, but whatever. So packed her up some cookies to go home with, and her husband took off as well. And so everything else the rest of the night was fine. I actually did another read for the friend that stayed over that night, and cards shuffled up fine. Nothing felt weird. Nothing else creepy or weird happened the rest of the night. We went to bed, no biggie. And a couple days later, I actually left out to California for a conference. And when I got there, I missed a call on my phone, and it turned out to actually be one of our supervisors at the hospital calling me to let me know that, oh, hey, Lisa's going to be out for a bit. And I said, oh, I called her back and said, what's up? And she says, well, her husband died. Now, this was a guy in his mid-50s, super active, super healthy, like no smoking, nothing. He actually ran or biked several miles every single day, no matter what the weather was like. And he'd actually gone out that morning on one of the trails to go jogging. And several hours later, another jogger came across him. And unfortunately, by then it was already too late. And he'd had a massive heart attack.
Wow.
So, of course, I hear this, and I'm out in California, and it struck me with the tarot read. Of course, I'm like, ooh, I hope she's not like weirded out by that. Like, I still was thinking to myself, it's like, I mean, that was still just an act. That's still just the thing that I always do. Like, that didn't mean anything. But it still felt weird. And I was really hoping that like the next time I saw Lisa, that wouldn't be anything to her and maybe she'd forgotten all about it. But when I got back and when she came back to work after the funeral and everything, that was actually the first thing that she approached me and said, was that real? That was her question to me, was that read real? I feel like those cards were saying something other than what you told me they said. And I couldn't answer that because all I could tell her was I wasn't faking that. That's what actually happened there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's just when I got to that point when you in your story and what you sent in, I was taken aback. It's a really interesting story for a lot of different reasons. One being that for you getting into it, it's a performative thing that you do for fun. And it seemed like even in the moment for you, the deck took over in a way, or something became centered on making sure that this particular message came through.
Yeah, that describes it correctly.
Yeah.
And there's 1,000 other stories I can tell you about weird stuff that happens at my house. But the number one thing about it, the more like until you guys actually called for submissions, I hadn't really ever like laid it all out or written it all out. And now I'm starting to. But the pattern that I get, and again, this is from somebody who is skeptical and I'm not sure what this really is, but it does seem to be, if there is a something here, it stages things. It does things to get my attention, and it does things in a way where it's like, yeah, you're right. I'm not in control of this all of a sudden. And it's really weird stuff. It's really weird and it's really random.
And maybe that's the message. You're not totally in control. You poke the bear and you got a reaction. And then now what do you do with that? And so, like you said, the feeling there was that something was trying to interact, get their attention, make a statement. And after a while, who knows how these things work, but is that something is maybe interacting with you just here and there, just saying, I'm here, whatever this is, they're there.
If you are giving yourself over to the idea that this wasn't just a coincidence in a strange series of events and something was affecting the deck in this particular reading, would you, as someone who lives in the house, and you may have a hard time with this because of your extremely rational and science-based background, but what would you attribute this particular reading to? Would you attribute it to a traditional tarot reading, whatever's behind tarot for all these thousands of years or however long it's been around? Or would you attribute it to something in your house meddling in your performance to send a message that it was aware of that should be told?
And that's a great question. And I have thought about that a little bit too, because the tricky part or the cusp of that question is, if these are the same thing, so let's just pretend for a second, call it an entity, let's just say that's doing these other things, it has never ever done anything else that made me think it was prescient, that it could foresee the future. Nothing else it's ever done has ever looked like that. Whereas this was something that essentially was prescient. Or was it picking up on something in Lisa's husband that none of the rest of us were picking up on? Also possible. So I can't answer that because it really hinges on that. It's like, was this actually predicting the future, or did it know something about his heart, for instance, that we didn't know?
Yeah, in kind of the more mundane way, which is still miraculous to a degree, is like the dog that can smell cancer.
Yes, yeah.
In somebody, or the cat that knows you're about to pass away and it comes and keeps you company in your last hours. The medical field is filled with this, but one statement here is, can the cards do their thing regardless of what you believe in? And that it doesn't require your belief or faith to operate. It's just doing its thing. It's kind of like the magic 8-ball, and sometimes it's wrong. But my question to you, this could be easily written off as just a coincidence, a bizarre one, a close to home one, but just a coincidence nonetheless, by someone who is skeptical or rooted in science or just agnostic like yourself about these things. So why do you believe this may be otherworldly or uncanny?
I think it is because of all of the other things that have happened to me here that it
Okay.
maybe does prime me for stuff here. If those other things had not happened, I truly would have written this off as a coincidence. It would have been like, whoa,
Right.
that was freaky. But however, with the
Yeah.
other things that have occurred, it's like, I have to second guess it.
When there's a pattern like that and there's a context now, it's not just random. It's not so random. And especially when it hits home to the person experiencing it, it's like somebody shaking you by the shoulders and then it's like, I'm still not listening to you. It's still,
Right, yeah.
how far are you going to deny it? But, again, it is now with your place and all the activity, there is context for this type of strange, uncanny coincidence.
Even though this particular thing has never happened again or since, I still, like, if I do the Halloween party and do tarot readings again this year, could something else happen? Absolutely. I have no idea.
All right. So let's talk about that context a little bit. I mean, a couple of quick questions, just from a chronological standpoint. How long have you lived in this house?
I've been in that house for 7 years now.
And how long ago was this event?
So this would have been 2018 when the tarot card reading happened. So I moved in there in 2016.
How old is the house?
It's only about, let's see, it was built in 2005. So it's actually one of the newest homes in this entire area.
Okay. What are some of the other things that are going on there, right? Especially the more poignant ones that are giving you pause about this tarot reading?
So probably the weirdest one is the one that happens once a year, every year. Literally once a year, every year. And again, this is the one that feels very, very staged. And like, I'm supposed to notice this because it's kind of in a window of time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So usually early December, but it's not the same day every year. So it's not like it's December 12th that this is going to happen. You can't predict when, but it's in that
coming
window.
up though. Yeah. It's about to happen again. Okay.
Yep. We're coming right up on it. So, and it only happens in the evening about 7-8 o'clock at night. So it's after dark, but it's not the middle of the night. It's not the witching hour. And it only happens when myself, any other person in the house with me, and all of our animals are in the living room of the house. All together, the TV might be on, but it's quiet. We're all right there, so we can all see each other, so we know it's not one of us doing it. Again, feels very set up. And what happens, so I kind of have to describe my house just a little bit. So the living room is on the far corner of the house, and there's basically the couch is on the wall, that's the outside wall. And then the TV is across the room on another wall. That wall is shared with the staircase going from the ground floor up to the second floor. So if you're sitting on the couch looking at the TV, you're looking at that wall, but you can't see the stairs. They're behind that wall. And what happens is there's footsteps on the stairs. You don't hear anything in the hallway below. All of a sudden there are footsteps, doot, 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 up the staircase to the second floor. They are unmistakably human footsteps. Like, not the house settling, not the wind, not any, like, anybody who has ever heard them with me has been like, yep, those were footsteps. And nothing else happens after that. You can go around the corner and look. There's no more sounds. There's nothing to see. The lights don't flicker, nothing. It just doot, 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 and it's done.
Is that fast that you're as like...
Just normal pace. Like, it's not hurried. It's not like a little kid scurrying up the stairs. It's not like heavy boots. It's not high heels. It's very indistinct, but it's definitely footsteps. Just doot, 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 doot up the stairs.
Okay.
And the weirdest part of all is, so back when it was my boyfriend who moved up here with me originally, he had cats, and these were skittish cats. Like, anything would set them off and they'd run away and hide. And now my current SO and I have 3 dogs, and they are watchdogs. They are guard dogs. They will freak out about anything. So if an actual another person was in our house walking around, I would fully expect my Doberman would be over there out for blood. But they don't do anything. They notice it, and the cats were the same way. They notice it, they sit up and they listen. And you can watch their eyes track it up the wall to the ceiling. But they don't freak out. They don't go check it out. They don't do anything. They just listen. And then as soon as it stops, they're like, okay. And they just go back to whatever they were doing. Like, they don't care.
So it's a resident they might be familiar with.
Exactly. Or it doesn't freak them out in any way, shape, or form. And it was kind of funny because when I started dating my current fiance, I told him about it. And he's in the same camp with me, mostly disbelieves, but has had some weird stuff himself, that same thing. And he did not believe me. He thought I was full of crap when I told him about the footstep thing. But as if the footstep creator was like, oh, I'm going to show you. It waited until a night when he stayed over, and that's when it did it. And it did it for him. and just the whole scenario. And then even his dog didn't freak out. His dog, who hadn't been there that much, was like, okay, whatever. Didn't freak out. So he freaked out. He was like, oh my God, is that what you were talking about? I was like, yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And he's a combat veteran. So his first instinct was to arm himself and just search the house top to bottom, out the garage, went around the property, couldn't find tracks, couldn't find anything. And I told him, you're not going to find anything. This happens and then it's done. And it won't happen again until next year.
It specifically is one time. It's not always the exact same day. It's around.
Correct. Yeah. Different days, but in that same window of time, roughly early December.
Right. And then the other thing that's interesting about that is that kind of rules out, the house is settling, all those kinds of things are ruled out by something that's that inconsistent. It's chronologically consistent, but otherwise, yeah, that's interesting.
It happens every year.
And you have confirmation of this external stimuli from the animals, that it's not just the humans hearing it, or, as we always say, is it happening in your head?
Yep.
Are you imagining it? Is it a group experience? But at least the animals are hearing something to it, that they're reacting.
Yeah.
And often they're reacting to something that humans don't hear. So
yeah.
You wonder about that, but everybody there is. So, well, I just had one comment about the shuffling of the cards, because that part struck me in the story, and I actually really didn't think about it too much until you started describing the cross pattern. And there are different ways that people can lay out the cards, of course, depending on what works for you. My personal story with that, and what I will vouch for, is that sometimes the shuffle is weird. I was over at an ex-girlfriend's house, and she, I wouldn't say dabbled in it. She'd read up about tarot and had a few books and did it occasionally. And, because I was curious about it. I have a deck of cards that I really like, which is the traditional Rider-Waite deck.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what she had. And it's like, but I kept begging her, probably like your friends, like, come on, do a reading for me. And she's like, I don't know. I don't want it. It's like, well, why'd you study up on this stuff if you're not going to try it? So come on, just do one. So we were hanging out. She goes, okay. I shuffled the cards. So she handed me the deck, and I did my my blackjack dealer kind of at the quarters, and did the bridge shuffle 4 or 5 times. And also, as part of it, you're giving the energy to the cards. So I shuffled it really well, a bunch of times, cut the deck, did the whole thing, handed it to her. So she did the reading and laid out, and it was that cross pattern. And she gets to, it's the adversary card, I guess, because I just remember what she said. I think it was the Sun card. And she said, there is something keeping you down, something keeping you from your personal glory, whatever it was, that's kind of holding you back. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. At least it's not just my choices. So,
or maybe it is, but
it's something. Maybe it's me. It didn't seem self-reflexive, and it was easy to blame the fault in your stars. So
we all got a little bit of that. Yeah.
So that was interesting, but I was fascinated by her explanation of all the cards and what they meant and how it laid out. And I said, can you do another reading for me? And she was like, no, I don't know. Just you get the one. And it's like, oh, come on. And I don't know why she was hesitant, because she wouldn't really explain. She goes, I just don't know. I just don't want to do it. Like, let's just watch TV. It's like, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll do it one more time, and then I'll never ask you to do it again. She's okay. So I took the cards and I really shuffled up, did the whole dealer thing where they're mixed on in a blackjack dealer, they're mixed on the rug, and I mixed them up, shuffled them really well, like 4 or 5 times, until almost where she was getting annoyed. So
like, hurry up, man.
Yeah. And so I cut the deck, and she lays out the cards, and I can't remember exactly, except for one card, they came out exactly as she had done the previous reading.
Yeah.
I mean, how many cards are in a cross? It would be 5 or 6.
So it's the 4 around plus the 2 in the middle. So that's 6 in the cross itself. And then if you do the other 4 off to the side too, then it's 10 grand total. So
I think it could have been 9 were exactly the same out of the 10.
Yeah.
And that freaked her out so bad. She was like, that's it.
Nope.
We're done. Because it's, like you said, it's a coincidence. People are like, well, yeah, come on. That's going to happen every once in a while. But like, what are the odds of that? It's very odd. And then she gets to the end. She's like, yep, there's still something there that's kind of invisible holding you back. And it's like, okay, well, at least that's whatever the message is coming through the cards. That's the message, is that you got to work on this, or just be patient. I told you once, I'm going to tell you again, whatever force is there. Yeah, take the hint, and don't, you don't need to shuffle it a third time and press your luck with this. So, but I was going to ask you, is there anything that weird? We've been getting a lot of weird Ouija stories. which are frightening. And has anything happened when you're just kind of messing around with it? Because for some people, nothing ever happens.
Yeah, in my case, no. We mess around with it from time to time, but we have never gotten it to really do much. And honestly, that can be kind of a mix of who's in the room. But yeah, I've never really gotten anything much out of that. Same with the runes. They're a lot less specific, so they're not that much. But this was the only time I've really done a fortune telling thing and freaked myself out with it. So back in the day, I've in high school in particular, when I first learned that I could do the cold reading thing, I actually used to get invited to parties to do seances.
Oh, wow.
And again, I knew I was full of crap. I knew
Right.
I was not talking to anybody, but it was interesting to see how little it took to freak people out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's one reason why I quit doing it, was because this feels kind of unethical, because I knew what I was,
Right.
I knew what I was doing.
Right.
Right.
So it was super easy to freak other people out, but that never freaked me out because I knew it was a game. The tarot read here was different because it actually did freak me out a little bit. And then what happened afterwards really freaked me out, even though I was still trying to tell myself, like, yeah, trying to convince myself.
What do you think about stories of patients experiencing near death and coming back to tell about it? Are you curious about that aspect or phenomenon?
I am, and I've witnessed it once where
Ooh.
somebody came back from a thing. So, I mean, obviously I've seen plenty of people pass away, and we've definitely resuscitated people many a time and got them back from the brink of death. The one that freaked me out, I gotta be a little careful to make sure I don't give away any details that would be
Sure.
HIPAA stuff. But essentially, this was an elderly man. He was in a bad car wreck, severe trauma to his abdomen in particular, and was not expected to survive. We took him crash style to the operating room, trying to do whatever we could. And shockingly, we were actually able to save his life. It was really touch and go, but we were able to save him. And this was not up here. This was at a huge level 1 trauma center that I used to be at.
Mm-hmm.
And he also had a head injury, so it was a while before he was really awake or coherent at all. But when he did, he actually came back really fast and seemed to remember way more than he should have. And he was actually able to, despite the fact that at the time he was, as far as we knew, unconscious, like not capable of telling anybody anything because he was intubated and all this other stuff. He was able to very accurately describe our ER and what it had looked like when we were taking him crash style down to the operating room. He didn't say anything about the operating room itself, but he knew a little too much about what things looked like on the way there before he was placed under anesthesia. So that one was weird. He did not describe it as, any kind of going to the light or any dead relatives or anything, but he was describing was basically an out of body thing where he was essentially sitting up on the cart, riding down there with us.
Interesting.
While his body was unconscious on the table. So that one I could not explain. That was a weird one. At the time, I'm kind of like, you were on a bunch of drugs and you had a head injury, but there were some things he said that I'm like, have you been in our ER before? He said, no, I've never been here before.
Wow.
And it was weird.
Well, it's like the mechanics of the card. Is it just in that condition, are you open up to some sensory input that is normally shut off to us? Or it's like the cards, are they in that condition or whatever? It's mundane in a weird way that we just don't understand. And like him being in that condition was able to intuit things or sense, have some sensory input that he shouldn't have. But it's not anything unnatural. It's just in those right conditions.
No, and that's my take on it. Yeah, and even if you subscribe to simulation theory or glitch in the matrix kind of stuff, I mean that explains what happens at my house too. That could be a glitch in the matrix, the footsteps, and
Right.
Yeah, like I could be hearing an echo of my own footsteps. I don't know, but I feel like there's probably somewhere a natural explanation for this stuff. I don't know what it is though. Like I'm not that smart. I don't know what that is.
There's a lot of things to think about when paranormal investigators look into something like that, which, they probably wouldn't because it's so rare and simple. But like, the first thing they would come and do is check for radon and carbon monoxide and things that might cause you to hallucinate or whatever.
Sure.
But then even if you're exposed to those kinds of outside influences, more than one person doesn't experience exactly the same thing, right? 2 people don't hallucinate the same thing. So you've already beaten that. Plus you've got the animals are aware of it. All of that stuff is very interesting. And we had heard over time that even with the house not being that old, that I can't remember who said this, but it struck a chord with me when they said it's the ground, not the building.
I believe that. Yeah. The property is older than the house.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
There's actually a lot of variables, like I said, it could be the person too, and the person in connection with the ground, in connection with.
Yeah, a combo of, and yeah, I never really met the people that I bought the house from, so I don't know if they had anything weird happen to them, but they were a young couple, they had kids, and they're the same age as me, so they're still alive,
Right.
and we're the only two people that have ever owned the house. And then, yeah, the other stuff that's more physical, tangible things moving stuff, it's like that one's even harder for me to explain. That's not a hallucination.
Moving in front of you or just being relocated?
Being relocated, and the weirdest one of all was the day that I came out and there was an egg smashed on the floor of my garage.
Oh, really?
No reason. Yeah.
From your own coops, you think, or?
No, because, and I know it was not one of my chickens' eggs, because yes, I do have chickens, but all of my chickens can only lay brown eggs. That's what breeds they are. This was a white jumbo egg like you'd buy at Walmart, and it was smashed on my garage floor, and it was like, hi, okay, there's an egg on my garage floor. I don't have any rational explanation for that.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, if you're gonna have a haunting, you got to break a few eggs. There's got to be
Exactly. Yeah.
to get your attention.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't fry on the floor, poltergeist styles. Like,
Right. Yeah. No, this was middle of winter, so it was mostly frozen.
oh my gosh.
Talk about getting egged in a Halloween theme. That's another part of that could be coincidence. But when it seems to be part of a joke, not that
Yes,
was, I'm just saying
yeah.
other things that happen, which is kind of like, it could be a visual palindrome of sorts, or a kind of a puzzle that is meant to reduce the amount of randomness to it and also deliver a funny message that's kind of sarcastic, perhaps. But you do wonder, it's like that takes a little bit of intelligence. And it's like, yes, we could be imagining it, but after a while, like, how much is too much,
Those were the last couple things that happened to me, were actually right after Halloween last year. That's when the egg happened. And then right around that time too, so one of my dogs, when she was a puppy, had a history of chewing up anything paper. So you could not leave a book or anything around. She would just destroy it. She's grown out of that for the most part, but I actually have a small collection of antique books, like medical books and stuff, that I keep locked up in my den so she can't get to them. So that's behind a closed door. And then during the daytime, I kept a baby gate across the stairs going up so that the dogs can't go up there during the day. One day I came home and door to the den was closed. Baby gate was still in place. I went upstairs to get my laundry, and laying on the dog's bed, like specifically that dog's bed, was one of my books. Untouched. Like it obviously wasn't her, because one, she couldn't get into the den.
Right.
Two, she couldn't get up the stairs. And three, it wasn't destroyed.
Right.
So it was not her.
Right.
But it felt like that one made me laugh, because I'm like, okay, if this really is a thing, like, it's screwing with me now. This was a funny joke right here. Was trying to frame the dog.
And maybe it kept her from actually destroying it out of
maybe she was up to no good.
Right.
I don't know. But yeah, it was like there was a few things that happened right around the same time as the egg, and that was one of them. And it was just like, this is so absurd that either somebody is playing a really long con on me here, but like, what is this?
Did you have white eggs in the house at the time? Do you buy them, or do you
Nope.
just?
No, I've got laying hens.
Right,
I
so
haven't
you don't
bought
need
eggs in
them.
years.
Okay.
Yeah. There was literally no clue where that egg came from.
Lisa from the tarot reading, did she retire? Are you still in touch with her?
Nope, she's actually still working with us, because after he passed away, she actually decided not to retire and has kept on going.
Okay.
And one night, actually, when was that? It was a couple summers ago. So it was after he had passed, but a few of us went over to her house and had dinner. And I kept getting the weirdest feeling that he was there. Like, I know that doesn't sound very skeptical at all, but it felt weird. And I looked at her and she goes, "Oh, you sense him too." I'm like, please don't say that. You're freaking me out a little bit here. She's like, "No, he's still here. He's still here." She fully believes that he is.
Oh my gosh.
Again, I love that angle, because being a super debunky, it's like, this is all baloney. Nothing happens to you. There's no afterlife. And then bingo, it's like, I guess I was wrong. It's like, suddenly it's like, there is an after, I'm somewhere, I'm not just,
or something. That's
right.
Exactly.
And then
it's like, hey man.
It doesn't do anybody any good. And you can't say, like, I told you so. He's just on the other side experiencing this, like, well, I was wrong all these years.
And still hanging out with my wife that I've known since kindergarten. So yeah, that makes sense though. I'm like, okay, yeah, he would. I think he would if he could.
A very good friend of mine died 3 weeks ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. He said, but he was 55 and in great health. And I was texting with him 2 or 3 Sundays ago, and then Wednesday he was gone. And so when you said that about Lisa's husband, it's scary. And Forrest and I are older than you. And so I'm certainly been thinking about my own mortality a lot lately. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm unable to avoid that just where I am. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just quickly, I want to say, because one of the things that we learn in remote viewing, and it's particularly a type of remote viewing called associated remote viewing, which, by the way, for someone who's skeptical and science-based as you are, I think you would enjoy looking into controlled remote viewing.
I actually really do want to try that.
I'm telling you,
it is interested in that.
It's a mind blow. Yeah. It's a mind blow. But with associated remote viewing, one of the things that you do is and I can't remember the name for this, Forrest. If it comes back to you, you can tell me. Oh, it's a temporal attractor. The idea behind this is that time is not linear and that you can reward yourself. It's very much, and I always joke. I joke about, have you seen Bill and Ted, the first one?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I always joke about the prison scene when they're like, we'll remember to go back and put the keys in the trash can behind the, whatever, in the jail, at his dad's jail. And so this is that kind of thing where you say, later on, I'm going to celebrate in this specific way this idea that I thought this was what this meant or didn't mean. And so you're telling yourself you're going to do that. And apparently you get better and better at this. But if you don't do that, it nullifies the instinct reaction that you had when you were trying to predict something. And so what I thought about when you talked about what was going on with that deck was how, regardless of what was happening with it, it was reacting to a future event because time is not linear.
Okay.
So it's just a theory, but.
No. And I mean, that goes into glitch in the matrix and simulation stuff too. I mean, time isn't linear there either. So
yeah, essentially what you're doing is we experience time linearly, of course, but it can go off. It's three-dimensional, right? It's not just a line, is that it goes off. And that's the idea with, any kind of remote viewing is that you are able to go off in different directions in the space-time continuum, anywhere at any time, backwards, forwards, present. So what you're doing though is that, and here's the thing, is that people say, well, how come you haven't won the lottery with that? It's like, well, there is a way to do that. They claim that you can kind of train yourself to do that. And of course, you start off trying to guess three numbers. And what the basic principle is, and it's nothing secret, it's on their website, is that you have somebody say, okay, move to next Thursday night, 7:15 p.m., the lottery drawing for the big three, the daily three numbers at 7 p.m. It's now 7:15, and you have to go by some kind of sense, like either tell me what you smell, tell me what you hear, tell me what you taste.
Yeah, you're associating.
Okay, I get you. Yeah, through the remote viewing stuff. Yeah.
So then what happens is that once that drawing happens next Thursday, and it's 7:15 p.m. and it's after the event, you then have the person who's the control person actually tell you what the associated numbers and the smells are. So it's like if 3 is garlic, let's say if you're doing taste, and the other number that was picked was 7, that's mint. And so what you're doing is you're beating a path loop, and you said with the temporal attractor, is that now you are moving ahead in time back on Monday to guess this, to be there at 7:15 and kind of have some prescience about what you're tasting. So if you said like, I tasted garlic, or I'm just popped in my head like a garlic taste, like, okay, you got 7, you got one of the numbers right. And you keep practicing with that, and eventually,
you don't know what the number was, but you know the taste or the smell or whatever.
Oh, I get you.
The other person who's assisting you has made that. So you're disconnected. It's a blind operation.
That's like a form of synesthesia,
right?
Which is a really fascinating thing. I actually have mild.
Oh, you do?
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I have a mild form of it. Yeah. I get colors with letters and numbers.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. But it's same kind of idea though, is that the reason you do the association and the associative remote viewing part of it is that cognitively numbers are kind of abstract to us. It's hard to guess numbers. And so you're much more able to grasp something.
An organic interaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Concrete,
that's more part of your sensory kind of inputs.
Like
and so,
smell. I would actually be out of luck on the smell because I have no sense of smell to speak of.
Oh,
okay.
In my career, that's a superpower. We like that.
Yeah. Or that's the thing, is that it maybe that's there. It's like with the cards, like you said, in the laying out the pattern, is that you don't know. You got to go whatever works. Like some of the things that, especially like with remote viewing, they think that it wouldn't make sense. Actually work with some people. Like they said, you might have a difficult session where nothing's coming to you, and it's really, you went to someplace really quiet, and it's like you're under a tree or, in some great controlled thing. They say, well, try going to a really noisy cafe. And it's like, what? That's not going to make any sense. Like, it's too much distraction. Just try it. And the person goes there, and actually, with all the chatter and the clanking the glasses, like you might have a better session. It's like there's
That's
no
Yeah, they have you track everything. Were you hungover?
Yeah.
Have you been drinking? Were you asleep? Were you rested? Were you like, whatever else? All that.
Are you high as a kite? What
Yeah.
are we doing? Yeah. Okay.
Or do we keep it all and then figure out where your best results come from and go back to that? The other thing about it is the people that use it to win the lottery don't go on the television and say, I remote viewed this.
Of course not. Yeah, because why would you? Yeah.
You wouldn't believe them anyway.
That's right.
So
Nobody would believe
it doesn't
it.
matter.
Oh, if I ever do win the lottery, I will say it, even if it's not true.
Just send us a picture. It could be Shawshank style. Just send us a picture of you with your new Ferrari or whatever, just.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. No, I was just thinking, it's like, if time truly isn't linear, I'm going to laugh my butt off if it turns out that I'm the one that dropped the egg in my garage, but it was me in the future.
Yeah, that's
there you go.
That's the thing.
I was messing with myself from
Molly, thank you so much for coming on and telling your story. I really enjoyed reading it, and I love the perspective, and it really put me in the Halloween mood because I could picture being at your house with the food and the drinks and the.
Oh, hey, there's an open invite if you ever want to.
Okay, all right. If we make it up there, we'll be stopping by, and we demand some spooky action.
Absolutely, we will try to stir it up for you. All right, it's been an absolute pleasure.
So, Molly, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great talking to you. This was a great story. It's one of the reasons that we sent out for stories for Halloween this year. So thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Scott and Forrest. This is great. I'm going to keep listening.
Awesome. To me, that story had a Reader's Digest quality to it, which I'm sure a lot of people don't remember anymore. But they used to have this section of great stories in each issue of that. Including the one we've talked about on the show before, There's Room for One More.
That's right.
An elevator cable and a carriage, spooky carriage. It's a good one. But anyway, I like how Molly tells that story. I like her disposition. And like you said, Forrest, I like her credibility.
Yeah.
All right. So it's time for our last story tonight. This was another great one. And we have a new composer and sound designer with us for the first time this evening. It's his first show. And he's just brought so much to these stories. So I'd like to thank Alan Caressia for his work on this show and hopefully many future episodes of Astonishing Legends. How did you hear about Astonishing Legends? You've been listening to us for a while, or?
So I feel like a lot of people, I picked up during the Oak Island series.
Oh, cool.
I'm really big into paranormal, but I'm equally, if not more, into kind of historical legends and cryptid stuff and kind of just really anything that's, weird and abnormal history.
It sounds like basically you like the stuff we do, but you told me a minute ago when we were ramping up here, you have your own podcast as well?
Yeah, some friends and I, for the past about 2 years, we've been doing this thing for ourselves where one of us each week will make a podcast about 5 songs. We call it 5 Song Friday.
Oh, cool.
And we just release it to each other, and we decided that we're actually going to make it into a full-blown podcast. So at the end of this month, we are going to make some final business decisions on everything and start recording it.
Wow. That sounds really cool. Now, how do you do that from an IP standpoint? Can you play parts of the song or you can't? Or what are the rules there?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're trying to figure out right now. Luckily, one of us is actually a lawyer. So
great.
We have a little bit of insight into the law aspect of that and what we can and can't do. But mostly what we think we're going to do is create the playlist, release it, and then make it a commentary show about the playlist.
Oh, that seems like a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then everybody's they have to pay for Spotify or pay for whatever to hear it anyway. The artist gets their money and you can talk about it.
Exactly.
That's super cool. First, why don't you tell our listeners your name and a little bit about yourself, whatever you're comfortable sharing, and then we'll get into your story.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So my name is Austin. I am currently living in North Alabama, and I've kind of been here my whole life. I moved away right after high school to Birmingham to go to college there. And that's really when my paranormal research stuff started. My whole life before that, I was always interested in paranormal stuff. I mean, I was the kid that was running around in a Taps shirt from Ghost Hunters when he was 10 years old. And we used to go on ghost tours and ghost walks and everything like that. So the paranormal was always a very big interest of mine. But once I got to college, I noticed that there was a sign just on a board saying that there was a ghost hunting club coming to the school. And so I was like, okay, cool. I just moved away. I need to make some friends. Let's join this. And joining that became me eventually leading it. It started out just kind of as a ghost hunting club. Then we became actually affiliated with the university and had funding.
Wow.
Yeah. How did that happen?
Pretty much kind of any club could go to the board of presidents or whatever of the college. And as long as you had a sponsor from a professor, you could get funding. And so we found a professor who would actually listen to us and took it to the board, and we received funding. It wasn't much funding, but it was enough to buy some gear and stuff.
I was just going to say, you're truly emulating Ghostbusters, right? You're
Yeah,
truly,
no, exactly.
They're on campus, they're trying to get money. Yeah.
Exactly. But the biggest thing that it got us was clearance into a lot of places. So yeah, we were actually able to, get in touch with people that were, over some of these more abandoned, say, mental hospitals in different areas, and go in there and not get potentially arrested for trespassing. So
Right. Yeah. When Forrest and I started out, I remember, Forrest, and I don't even know if you remember this conversation, but do you remember when we briefly were like, how can we get press passes? Do you remember that?
Well, it's not something you want to mess with. We tell people all the time. I mean, legend tripping is fun, but a lot of these places are private property, or they're government or state. And even though they're run down, and you are trespassing in a lot of cases, it's dangerous. So it's better to have authoritative permission and access to a lot of these places. But that's the other thing as well, is that a lot of the more active places are these types of institutions. So that's great. You were able to get a little bit of sanctioning from the school, and then again, access to these places. And of course, I think you're in a good spot of the country for a lot of storied history and activity.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was going to say. The South is like, I mean, I'm in the South too, not as deep as you are, but like there's so much. I mean, it's just whatever city you go into, and anything that's technically the South, you're like, oh yeah, that city's haunted. That's, I've driven through Alabama a few times, and I've driven through a lot of states because I love to road trip and all that, but I have not ever really visited Alabama, which I would love to do.
Yeah.
I want to ask him about a mystery before we even get to the other mysteries.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a great opportunity, especially for college kids who have the energy and can stay up late at night and still do their studies and get to all the other stuff. And how many investigations overall do you think you and your club have done?
In the 4 years we were together, I would say we were doing at least one a week. So probably close to, obviously not during the summer and stuff, but I would say we at least went to probably 100 to 150 places.
Wow. That's amazing.
And some of those were the same place over and over again, but we went a lot.
What percentage of those investigations would you say you could find a mundane explanation for?
For me personally, I would probably say like 75%.
Right.
We kind of went in with the aspect of, if it can be anything else, it most likely is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's the way to do that. Yeah.
And like, obviously we had some people that would come and join, that would come and, obviously think that every single thing, every orb that they got on camera was something. But for me, being a skeptical person in general, it took a lot to convince me. But when it did convince me, it really convinced me.
Yeah, when you have your bar set a little higher, especially if you come from a generally healthy skeptical viewpoint, then when something is outside of that range where it's personally undeniable to you as the experiencer, then it has a lot more impact. And, frankly, it's a lot more impact for a lot of other people that are looking at the data, which brings me to my next question. Out of all these investigations, you must have collected a lot of media. What do you think is your best evidence? And then here's the follow-up question. Where did it all go?
Yeah, I would probably say our best evidence that we got was actually not recorded. And so we were at a mental hospital in Tennessee, and we had a spirit box, which I'm sure you guys know how those work. They scan.
I got one in a drawer right behind me.
Yeah. And so with those, it's obviously very hard to tell when it really is something, because it's like, am I just picking up the same radio station over and over again?
Right.
But I was downstairs in this area, and the rest of the group was upstairs. I was watching on cameras, because we had cameras we would run in every building we went into. And all of a sudden they came on our walkie-talkie, and they were like, this thing wants to talk to you. And so apparently it kept saying my name, but it wasn't in an exact set frequency where it would have been the same radio station. Right. And this whole night there, we hadn't gotten any evidence until I went up there, and then it started responding to me, answering yes or no questions, like very clearly through the spirit box. It wasn't just a blip in the radio, and it was only going to talk to me. I don't know why, but it was like just saying Austin over and over again. From what it answered, it was a doctor that had worked at the hospital previously. I'm not sure if they had passed away in the hospital or not. But yeah, it was a really weird moment for me. That was kind of the moment that I was always kind of skeptical on some things.
Right.
But that moment really was like, okay, this is something I can't explain.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's in context. Like I said, it doesn't seem to be the random meter goes way down because it is responding. It's interacting rather than just spitting out words that are out of context, don't have any meaning. You might get the response when you asked for it, but when it seems like it's answering a question, that's a whole different thing. So
yeah.
Why weren't you recording that?
I don't know. It was the rest of the group. So at that point, we had went with some people who it was their first time. And I think that they just weren't recording. But a lot of that stuff, just because we were college students, it got lost.
Yeah.
However, there is, I believe, a YouTube channel still up that has a few of the videos that we kind of compiled together. And it should just be called Paranormal Research Society at UAB. I haven't looked and seen if it was up anymore.
That seems to be the case with a lot of stuff, is that when you're there, you don't get it. I mean, I think maybe if I've ever seen a full body apparition, I had just turned off the camera at Waverly.
Literally every
because
time.
we were going to be moving. It's like, okay, we've been sitting here for 20 minutes in the dark, got nothing. And then something happened, and I still don't know what to make of it or what that was, if anything, or if it was just, I don't know. But I was really excited after it just happened. It's like, wait a second, did I just see something? Because I just checked the room and there's nobody in there where this person walked into. And then I was very excited. It's like, the camera, I've got the video camera. And it's like, no, I just shut it off just before it happened. And like that happens so often, or you
trickster.
Yeah, you don't get the, I don't know if it knew or whatever that was knew, but you don't often have the recorder going. But in something like that where it's at college and, you're not on staff there, you're college students, and that who's going to take care of all this stuff? Like the hours and hours.
And Forrest knows this, and we haven't really talked about this on the air, I don't think, but like I'm wanting to assemble a team of volunteers at various experience levels, but like, inexperienced people at the bottom, no offense to them, that are going through the first review of media, and then they red flag things and they move up the chain until you get to this point, like a media review team. And we've actually kind of started the structure for this, but like, you have to manage it like on Slack or something, and like have people, and then there's going to be a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of hard drives and all that. So it's like, because our friend James Willis has done these investigations. He was talking about, I want to send you guys, but it's just like 20 hours of stuff.
Yeah.
Some video, some audio, whatever. Even our own stuff. I don't know. Forrest is pretty good about it, but I think there's some of our own stuff that we haven't even listened to.
Speaking of stuff, though, we're going to talk about one of the, I guess it's probably one of the more famous haunted locations in Irondale, Alabama, and probably close to the university there.
Yeah, it's about 20 miles west.
Reading through the story, it's like, I liked your email here because it is from the perspective of somebody who had been a lot of ghost hunts and somebody who knows what to expect as far as a phenomena with a healthy, skeptical eye to it. But some strange things happen that are unexplainable, and they're a bit dramatic. And then you wonder, was there any media captured of the experiences there? Did it just go into the void?
Yeah. So we had what we found the recording on. It was done on just like a little, $30 Sony handheld recorder. And it was, one that we plug into the computer. We'd record it into Audacity, and then we would go in and filter out anything that was our voices or anything that was any external noise. So anything that was left was either static or something that was underneath the layer of our voice. Unfortunately, all of those files, like everything, pretty much got lost.
I get it. Yeah, don't feel bad.
It's been going on ever since there was files, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
And I had even checked before to see if in like my old college email, Outlook, if it was there. All of that has been deleted since I got left. I guess the university just clears everything, which is probably where it would have been.
The other thing that we know is that it's not really deleted because nothing ever is. But by the same token, you can't get to it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's in some server somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Let's get to your story. Let's share it with our listeners. I know they're anxious to hear it.
This story takes place pretty early on in the timeline of having the ghost hunting club, which at the time was actually called BLIP, BLIPP, and it stood for Birmingham League of Investigators of Paranormal Phenomenon, and we just realized that was too long. And so we shortened it down to PRS, which was Paranormal Research Society. Nice. So this was, very early on. the cemetery that this takes place in, Bath Cemetery, if you look it up online, you'll see a lot of different ghost stories. Obviously, some are legends, some are true. Some people will talk about people doing satanic rituals in the cemetery. A lot of legend, especially in the area. You know, every small town has that place that has a haunting and a legend, and that's kind of the place for Irondale. So we had been here maybe 2 or 3 times before this happened. This was kind of the place that we would take a lot of people when they joined the group, because it would always gave something. You would always get some type of experience, whether it be someone was touched, hearing a disembodied voice, seeing something off in the distance move. It was just that kind of place that every time you went, something would happen. And then this night was kind of the one where everything happened. To kind of, set the story, the cemetery is closed off by a gate. We had access and permission to go in, so we go through the gate. And immediately once you go through, you start seeing a lot of destroyed gravestones and mausoleums. So there were I think 2 or 3 mausoleums here at one point. And in the mid 2000s to early 2010s, a lot of them were destroyed. And the pieces are all spread out through the cemetery. So a broken gravestone in the cemetery is not uncommon.
Right.
So this particular gravestone was underneath a tree kind of in the middle of the cemetery. We called it the Bass tree because one of the graves under it was a person by the last name of Bass, which the cemetery was named after. And so this kind of was a central meeting place because our group at sometimes was anywhere between 10 and 20 people. And so we would spread out through the cemetery. And it wasn't a very large cemetery, but it was enough to where if 2 people were at one end and 2 people were at the other, they wouldn't see or hear each other, especially at night. And so we would kind of meet in this area and do a lot of our group EVP sessions. We would get EMF readings and stuff like that. So at this point, we had been here for probably 45 minutes to an hour. Kind of our process, anytime we went anywhere, was to go take baseline readings of EMF, temperatures, even using EVPs just to see if we got anything when we first got there. Because something that we noticed was as soon as you came into a place, it was almost like you had stirred up the energy, stirred up everything there, and nothing wanted anything to do with you until it got used to you being there. And that kind of tended to be the case with everywhere we went. So
interesting.
We had been there, like I said, for about an hour or so, and we go to this tree and we start asking, what is your name? Why are you here? And a lot of the stuff we would ask would be, make a noise if blank, because maybe the spirit or the energy can't communicate verbally, but it could make something, move or make a noise or something like that. So this tree in particular, the Bass tree, we would call it, like I said, it was known for being one of the most haunted places in the cemetery. People would get pictures of the tree and it would look like bodies were hanging from the tree or just streaks hanging from the tree. It was speculated this was used for lynchings and hangings during the Civil War because some of the oldest graves in the cemetery are from the Civil War, and there was a lot of Confederate and Union camping around this area during the war, as well as it being right beside a railroad track, which will play into the story later. So as we're standing around this tree, we started asking various questions, and we weren't really getting anything that we could hear until we asked the question, if you want us to leave, make a noise. And for about 5 seconds, it was dead silent. And then we heard what I can only explain as a train derailing and colliding with another train. It was one of the loudest things I've ever heard in my life, but there were no trains on the track. You couldn't hear a train, you couldn't see a train, and the track was very visible from where we were standing. And there was nothing on the tracks. The next day, we actually contacted them, asked, were there any train collisions or anything last night? They said the tracks were actually closed off in that area and there was no maintenance or anything going off in that area. So nothing should have been on that track. And the noise was so loud that literally people fell to the ground and were screaming because it was terrifying, because we just asked, if you want us to leave, make a noise, and 2, just because it was so loud. However, we did not abide by that, and we stayed for probably another hour to 2 hours.
Can you describe the type of noise? Was it more, as you said, it was it metallic?
Yeah, you could hear like the reverberation, like
Wow.
when, if you hit something metal, it's going to reverberate. But at the same time, it sounded like a large object hit something metallic. So it wasn't just like someone banged on the side of a metal building or something like that.
Right. Or a gunshot or anything like that. It was less explosion and more crash.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Wow.
So yeah, after that is kind of when the more physical things started this night. So we had someone that was pretty new to the group, and they were off with one of our separate groups that I wasn't with. And this was kind of in an area that was in the very back corner. And a lot of people had described dark feelings of dread, seeing things out there, which, I mean, it was at the back of the cemetery next to an open area of the gate, because the cemetery was gated, but this area was open. So, obviously it's going to have some weird feelings just being back there, especially if you're by yourself. So we didn't really think anything much of that being something people described. But all of a sudden we kind of heard someone scream, and we ran over to that area, and he had a full handprint on the left side of his face, like a red handprint as if someone had slapped him. And everyone else in the group that was over there with him, I definitely trusted, and they said, we saw him. He did not slap himself. No one here slapped him. It was a very, very terrifying situation. And at that point, we did leave because, obviously they told us to leave. We didn't, and something happened. So we don't want to risk anything worse happening. So at that point, we did leave. Everyone got a good night's rest, and the next day we would, pretty much after any investigation, the next day we would spend all of our free time going through our evidence and everything like that. And when we went through our evidence at that point, just listening back to the EVP without cutting out the audio, we couldn't really hear much, except I heard something that sounded like someone saying hello. So I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. So once we go in, we cut everything out. Then it became very clearly that it was someone saying the name Ednia Colo, which was very weird because that's not a very common name, especially for, at the time in 2015. Both the first and the last name are not very common at all. So we would always go when we were working in the cemetery if we thought there was someone, infamous, or someone says there's a ghost of some specific person there, we would go on Find a Grave, look up, see if their grave was actually there, and see where it was. So we go on there, and to this day, there's only 2 names on there with the last name Colo for Bath Cemetery. There's a John Colo, and then there is a person with the last name Colo, but the first name is not on there. And it does say wife of John Colo.
The name would be Ednia, so it's capital Ednia. Last name Colo, Killlough.
Yeah.
Just so people can now picture the name of the spelling, because that is important when you go to look this up and you can't really find anything.
Yeah.
But eventually you do.
Yeah. We saw in there that there was a last name Colo, but no first name, but it said it was wife of John Colo. And we went back probably a week or 2 later, because we did, like I said, go to the cemetery a lot just because it was close and we always got evidence. And we found the grave right underneath where we were standing of John Colo. And then there was a broken headstone next to it. And the broken headstone had the last name Colo, and it said wife of John Colo on the headstone. But we did not find a first name. And it was not until later on that we were for sure that this was Ednia. We always kind of assumed that it was, because, that said the name was there as the last name, it said wife. And very recently I saw that at some point, I actually thought that this was after the investigation, but actually I was looking the date, turns out this was before, and I guess it was knocked down again. Someone repaired the headstone, seemingly using some type of plaster to fill in the name Ednia. But then I believe that was in 2013. So this is actually, like I said, before we investigated there, and the headstone was destroyed again. So I'm not sure why that particular headstone was destroyed multiple times. I don't know if it was because it was repaired, maybe a storm blew it over again. and destroyed it or something like that. But as far as I know, to this day, the headstone is most likely still destroyed. The cemetery is the last time I went by there to actually show my girlfriend, which was maybe a year ago or so. It was completely gated off, locked, no way to get in. So I didn't want to trespass and hop over the gate or anything like that. But yeah, it was very interesting that if you go on Find a Grave, there is only one name that is missing, and it is Ednia Colo's first name. And it kind of just made me think, was she saying her name so that people would know it? Was it something else disguising itself as her?
Right.
Was she the one that made the train noise? Because people had often described a female presence there as well as a male presence. And that was something that we definitely felt as well, even before this. We felt that there was someone that was a male presence that was seemingly a little bit more in control and demanding. And then there was a female presence. So if I had to take my educated guess, I would say that whatever male presence it was is what slapped him. And potentially that was what told us to leave. But, it might have been Ednia, or was it something completely else that was disguising itself as her?
I'm seeing, as you said, on Ancestry, such a great tool, by the way.
Yeah.
And I went to the Find a Grave link you sent. I'm also seeing her on an 1880 census.
Yeah.
Where she, I guess she was 68 years old. She lived in Jefferson, which is a couple of hours from Irondale, where she was buried. But on the census, notably, it just says her and John in the house. He was 69, she was 68 at the time. It just says occupation, quote, keeping house.
The interesting fact starting off is that the activity is pretty low until people or whatever is there gets used to you a bit.
Yeah.
It's like going to a party, right? It's like you burst through the door. You're not just immediately doing magic tricks and telling jokes. You talk to people for a while. You get to know them, and then the party kind of livens up from there. But you'd also mentioned in your email that people often have the sense of somebody running past them, and sometimes it was female. And of course, this is what's funny. Early on, I think I mentioned this in another story, and we got a few critical emails of just saying, like, that's ridiculous. What, Forrest is saying, like, something was female. It's not, for one, it doesn't exist. It's not there. It's all baloney. But how could you even tell if something is, you could tell the sex of something, a male or female? Again, I haven't, but I notice a lot of people have, where they just know. It just seemed like that.
Yeah.
What about these intense feelings of dread in certain areas, and then these presences running by? What was happening with that?
I actually do have an experience with the spirit running by. So myself and one of my co-investigators, we were walking kind of on the backside, actually kind of near where the slap happened. And we both kind of heard footsteps behind us running towards us. And then we were kind of standing, side by side, but maybe 1.5 to 2 feet apart. And we both at the same time felt a gust of wind come between us that made us move away. And it was only felt, in between us, not on the other sides of our bodies, not on our backs, just directly as if something was running between us. And the kind of weird thing with that was, for me, it felt like something brushed against my leg as like a dress would feel. Now, obviously, that could just be the wind as well. But it was, just very interesting that I heard someone running, felt that, and then it felt like a dress passed by my leg. So I think that, that for me is kind of what made that particular spirit feel feminine. But I feel like with most people, at least people that I've experienced, talk about something feeling feminine, it tends to feel more, or I guess less of a demanding presence, and something that feels more trapped, which, obviously doesn't mean particularly that it's female. But I think that it just becomes an association with people thinking of, oh, this is a female being reprimanded or underneath some type of demanding male spirit or something.
Right. Those relationships back then where you have a more domineering patriarchal presence, why wouldn't that carry over into whatever trapped spirits are there now? And also somebody who could have been abusive. And he's so here's the question. The guy that got slapped, I'm sure you got photos of that at the time. And then how long were the handprints there?
That's the really interesting thing, is that it was not there long. It was probably at most 3 minutes, which I feel like, if you if I, slap myself in the face,
Yeah.
the mark is going to stay there longer, or there
Right.
might be bruising or, residual pain. But,
Right.
after like 3 minutes, it went away. There was no bruising. He wasn't in pain after that. It was just there, and then it was gone, which is something else that I've noticed in a lot of other people's stories is it's there for, 2 minutes and then it's gone. Even when it's sometimes with scratches or something like that, they go away very quickly.
In Birmingham, are you familiar with Colo Springs?
No, actually.
Okay, so just while we were talking, I was looking this up and found some interesting stuff, which isn't necessarily connected to anything that you cross paths with other than in a familial or genetic or ancestral way. Colo Springs apparently is a subdivision in the eastern section of Birmingham, which was built on the original Colo plantation.
Interesting.
Here's what's interesting about that. The Colo plantation was built by a couple of twin brothers, James and Isaac, who eventually moved to Texas from there. They had moved there from, it looks like from South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and then to Alabama. And they went to Texas and with some land that had been, I guess, given to them or deeded to them or something. I don't have all the details because I'm looking this up on the fly here. But the land that was supposedly given to them was hotly disputed in terms of its ownership by Cherokee Indians. And there was a massacre known as, and it has its own Wikipedia page, the Colo Massacre.
Wow.
Believed to have been the largest and last Native American attack on white settlers in East Texas. Took place October 5th. That would be the anniversary of that would be tomorrow as we're recording.
Oh, wow.
Near Larissa, Texas in 1838. 18 victims, including Isaac Colo Sr. and his extended family, who had immigrated to the Republic of Texas from Talladega County in 1837. So I wonder if Ednia's husband was, he must have been related to this family
of course.
in some way. Obviously stayed behind, which would have been apparently the right decision for him.
Yeah.
But, that's interesting that there's, you just start looking around and you start finding these, this history. I love that kind of stuff.
When stuff happened, again, this is the other thing. It's not only that there were other witnesses to the phenomenon or the sensations that were happening to confirm that it's not just you, but the other, I think it's also a weird thing when only certain people feel something and others don't. Was there a time there in your investigation where with a loud sound, that might have been stranger if two people there, well, it's kind of like our Phantom Horse of Greensboro story. It's like one person didn't see anything at all. But when that loud crash went off, you all heard it, right? All at once at the same time.
Yeah.
Was there any other instance, though, where something happened and maybe only a couple people nearby experienced it, but nobody else did?
There were definitely a few times. One particular that comes to mind is when we were in South Pittsburgh Hospital in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. There was and I say this as someone that does not believe in 99.9% of orbs that have ever been photographed or talked about.
That's you and Scott, yeah.
Yeah, we had our camera rolling. It didn't catch this. Two of the other people didn't catch this, but me and one of my friends caught this, that there was a sphere of light, probably 6 to 7 inches in diameter, that was just in front of us, and it would move as we moved. It was like we were following it unintentionally, or it was leading us somewhere unintentionally. And then eventually it just disappeared. And only the two of us saw it.
Wow.
Okay. But that's still two. That's better than one person. Because that's the thing I was going to ask about the train crash sound. Did certain people hear it and certain didn't, or everyone heard it? And then it's different if it's one, because and you've listened to our show. You've heard us debate whether or not those sounds are happening out in the wild or they're happening in your head. Like you don't have a recording of that sound, right? Nothing was recording when that happened.
No.
The crashing sound. Right. So you have to wonder if somebody was watching that didn't hear it, if they just saw a bunch of idiots all falling on the ground, like that feels like you wonder, is it out there? Is, if a ghost train crashes in the woods and no one's around, will anyone hear it?
Exactly.
Kind of thing,
I was going to say if there's no external stimuli causing that, then it's a very, very strange case of multiple simultaneous exploding head syndrome with a group of people that aren't going to sleep, or it's not hypnagogic, or it's very odd. And like I said, it's we can tell these you can tell these stories and we can elaborate, and people will say, well, that was pretty weird, but it is one of those things a lot of the times where it would be so much more if you were there experiencing that. Like I said, that's got to be a lot of energy. Most of the time you don't hear about something that loud or a slap that forceful. It's pretty light. I've heard of people, gray fryers, where you'll feel a little, somebody kind of grab you lightly and there'll be some fingerprints, but a full on slap like that takes a little bit more energy than usual. And like I said, that's a pretty good fishing hole if you're getting stuff all the time. But
exactly.
Yeah, in that sense with the crash, though, that being that loud and people's ears were ringing, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was very metallic. So it's like, it was, as someone that has tinnitus, it made my ears ring. And so, it's very alarming to me that it was not, just something that.
Right. Well, that would suggest that it was a real sound. Then if it triggered it, because I have that too, by the way, and I don't have it, thank God, constantly like some people do.
Yeah,
I don't know if
I don't
you
either.
do. For me, it is specifically triggered by a certain frequency and pitch.
Yeah.
It's so funny. My wife used to perform improv with the Groundlings Theater in LA, and there was one person, and who I'm not going to name, who performed with her, who is a famous television personality now. Whenever she came out and was doing a bit where she started screaming, I literally had to close my ears because it was like, I guess what I'm saying is someone who personally has experienced that sound must have been in the wild if it triggered that, because that's a physical reaction. That's not an in your head reaction. That's a physical reaction.
Yeah. And that also kind of segues into another interesting thing that I'm not sure if you've ever experienced, having tinnitus, but obviously it is, set on by certain frequencies. I have a weird thing whenever I go to somewhere that is typically deemed haunted, that I start having very bad tinnitus. And
really?
Only in very particular places, such as in Savannah, Georgia, at the Sorrel Weed House. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of that.
No. I've heard the name, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very haunted house in Savannah. One of the times that I went there, I had a severe attack of tinnitus while I was in the house. And it kind of happens in certain places, and it happens in, obviously in normal day life too, but very particularly when I go to somewhere that's been, said to have been haunted.
Yeah, in that case, when it happens to you, you're probably more inclined to believe that it's a haunting, because it's like a standard thing for you to personally to expect.
Exactly.
Y'all went back to Bass at some point, right? You went back. That wasn't the last time. You, I guess, not heeding the warning to leave there. Did you ever encounter Ednia again, or anything that? I guess let me put it this way: had you ever encountered something that you believe in all your visits there was a recurring presence or feeling, that somebody kind of got to know you there, and maybe the next time you showed up also wanted to visit?
No, I think kind of every time we went, it was always something different. But I will say it tended to be more attached to the females in our group. If it was, say, just like a tug or, someone touching you. And then we had one instance where one of our investigators, her name was Katie, and we heard something once we went and cut out all of our audio that said the name Katie. Now, obviously, that might have been someone in the distance saying her name that wasn't picked up when we cut it through as someone standing nearby. But that was just kind of an interesting thing that happened, that we never thought too much of it, because we could kind of rule that out as potentially someone else, but also potentially not at the same time.
The other thing that's interesting about that is it reminds me of EVP stories that we've heard, and you may have heard us talk about them on the show, where people have gone back through the media and heard a voice that was a member of the party that was there, but was not in the room where the EVP was picked up.
Yeah, I've never had that happen, but I've definitely heard a lot of people that I've talked to that were in different paranormal groups talk about that before.
You're fortunate to have covered the grounds of not only Alabama, but Tennessee and a lot of different places. Is there any other anecdotes that you'd like to share, or just an overall feeling after after 100 investigations? Is there anything that you would like to comment on, like just about the experience or anything in particular?
Yeah, I think kind of the only thing that I would say is just, in general, what I've kind of come to conclude to myself is, there are truly, multiple types of hauntings. Like, something that's a residual haunting, like something, the way I explain it is the woman looking out the window waiting for her husband to come back. That to me is just an imprint of energy that's been there, because by the laws of energy, it cannot be created or destroyed. And if someone is in one particular area for so long, it's going to leave some type of imprint. And then obviously there are, poltergeist situations. Like the Black Monk is a very favorite of mine because it's a very interesting, like what was actually happening there. There's a wide variety of things you could, say that was what's happening there. And it doesn't really fit with the majority of even poltergeist cases. I've kind of just learned that there's a lot of different things that are paranormal, whether it be ghosts, cryptids, Skinwalker Ranch stuff. There's so many different things, but is it all the same thing, or is it a wide variety of things that we just simply don't understand from a scientific standpoint?
I think you should come be a guest host. Man.
Yeah, we'll go out in the field and you can,
I like
you can stay back here at the mic and direct.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on the show. If there's anything that you'd like to point the listeners to, whether it's your pending podcast or anything else, please feel free to plug away right now if there's any place you want to point people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have anything to, point towards yet because the podcast isn't up and running yet.
Do you still ghost hunt?
Yeah, so I haven't done like a full ghost hunt in probably 3 years.
Okay.
I've done a lot of ghost tours in different cities and stuff like that. But I definitely, if I get the right group of people, which to me is kind of the hard thing, is finding a group of people that's not going to go out and, just be blatantly screaming and, just believing everything that they see is a ghost. So, it's kind of about finding a group of like-minded people that are going to approach it from a scientific standpoint.
Well, folks, that's going to conclude the first 3 stories of this series. Thanks very much to Jeff, Molly, and Austin for joining us. Come back next week as we all fall even further into the void. That's going to wrap up part 1 of Your True Halloween Stories. Join our Patreon to hear us on the much more candid Astonishing Junk Drawer, which most of the time we do live on video for our patrons.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also head of research and the social media manager. Our technical producer is Ed Vicola, or as we call him, the Mechanic. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland.
Hi, I'm Paul Strauch. Hello, everyone. This is Paul Strauch. I'm Paul Strauch. I'm Paul Strauch. I'm Paul Strauch. Hold on. Paul Strauch.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Every episode going back to September of 2020 has a transcription available on its corresponding webpage at our website. Earlier transcriptions can be made available upon request to astonishingcontact@gmail.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content, including the Patreon exclusive show, Astonishing Junk Drawer, which is available every week. The main show is not. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.